They say family is supposed to have your back. Mine threw me to the wolves. My name is Olivia Ross, and 3 months ago my parents disowned me based on a lie my sister told. They accused me of stealing $500,000 from the family business money I never touched, transactions I never made. But Madison stood there with fake tears streaming down her perfect face, playing the devastated victim so convincingly that our parents didn't even ask for my side of the story. My father threw my suitcase down the front steps while neighbors watched. My mother screamed that I was dead to them. Madison filmed the whole thing and posted it online with the caption, "My sister, the betrayer." I lost everything in a single day: my family, my reputation, my career. Everyone believed her lies. But here's what they didn't know. I'm not just the daughter they threw away. I'm the one who built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from nothing. I'm the one who saw the financial crash coming before anyone else. And I'm the one who kept detailed records of everything. 3 weeks after they destroyed me, Madison made a catastrophic mistake. She lost $50 million in a single investment money she'd convinced our parents to trust her with. The family empire collapsed overnight. And suddenly the daughter they called a thief became the only person who could save them. This is the story of how the family who abandoned me came crawling back, and what I did when they begged for mercy. Because revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about making them realize exactly what they threw away. My name is Olivia Ross. I'm 39 years old, and for the last 15 years I've built a career as a finance consultant in Seattle, the kind of work that requires precision, patience, and the ability to see patterns others miss. I've helped tech startups secure funding, guided entrepreneurs through acquisitions, and built a portfolio that most people spend lifetimes trying to achieve. But none of that has ever mattered to the people who raised me. To my parents, I'll always be the daughter who thinks too much and feels too little, the one who chose spreadsheets over sentiment, as my mother once said with thinly veiled disappointment. The drive from Seattle to my parents' home in Oregon takes 7 hours if you push it longer if you stop to breathe. I didn't stop. The birthday party for my mother's 65th was scheduled for 6 o'clock, and I knew arriving even 5 minutes late would be noted, cataloged, and added to the invisible ledger of my failures. My sister Madison has never worried about such things. She could arrive an hour late with nothing but a bottle of grocery store wine, and they'd call it spontaneous and charming. The house looked exactly as it always had: white colonial with black shutters, perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of home that appears in real estate magazines under the heading, "Timeless Elegance." I pulled my sedan into the circular driveway behind a silver Mercedes I didn't recognize, and a cherry-red convertible that I did. Madison's car. Of course, she'd already arrived, probably hours early, to help with preparations and soak up every moment of my mother's grateful attention. I grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat, the leather portfolio containing the stock certificates and transfer documents I'd had my lawyer prepare. $200,000 worth of shares in my consulting firm transferred cleanly into my parents' names. It was more than a gift. It was proof that I'd succeeded despite their doubts that the daughter they'd always considered too cold and calculating had built something of genuine value. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair freshly styled, her smile bright, but somehow not reaching her eyes when she looked at me. "Olivia," she said, her tone the same one she might use to greet the mailman. "You made it. Come in, everyone's already here." Everyone. As if I were late, though, my watch showed 5:47 p.m. I stepped into the foyer and the sound of laughter rolled toward me from the living room. Madison's laughter, unmistakable and musical, followed by my father's deep chuckle. I'd forgotten that sound. When was the last time I'd made him laugh? The living room was filled with neighbors and family friends, people I'd known my entire childhood, holding wine glasses and small plates of hors d'oeuvres. Madison stood at the center of it all, radiant in a flowing emerald dress that matched her eyes, holding court like she was born to it. She saw me immediately, and her smile brightened. "Liv?" She swept across the room and pulled me into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and felt somehow performative. "I was starting to worry you wouldn't make it." Traffic was fine, I said, extracting myself from her embrace. Happy birthday, Mom. My mother accepted my kiss on her cheek with a brief pat on my shoulder. Thank you, dear. You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep? Before I could answer, Madison linked her arm through mine. She's been working too hard, haven't you? Always working. Liv, you need to learn to slow down. Enjoy life a little. This from the woman who hadn't held a steady job in over 3 years. The party continued around me, conversations about golf handicaps and vacation homes, the latest drama at the country club. I found myself standing near the fireplace, nursing a glass of wine I didn't want, watching Madison charm every person in the room. She had a gift for it, I had to admit. She remembered everyone's names, asked about their children, laughed at the right moments. She made it look effortless. My father finally approached me, his expression businesslike. Olivia, good to see you. Dad, I set down my wine glass. I brought something for Mom. For both of you, actually. I retrieved the leather portfolio from my bag and handed it to him. He opened it with the same careful attention he'd once used to review my report cards, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined the documents inside. Stock certificates, he said, his tone neutral. Shares in my consulting firm, I explained. They're worth $200,000 at current valuation. The firm's grown 30% year over year for the last 5 years. I wanted you both to benefit from that success. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. He turned to my mother, who had drifted over to see what we were discussing. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. That's very generous, my mother said carefully. Though I have to ask, are there strings attached, conditions? The question hit me like a slap. No conditions. It's a gift. Because we wouldn't want to accept something that might complicate things down the road, my father added, still studying the documents with what looked like suspicion rather than gratitude. From across the room, Madison's voice carried over the conversation. Are you trying to buy back affection, sis? The room went silent. Every head turned toward us. Madison stood there with a wine glass in hand, her smile playful, but her eyes sharp. I'm kidding. It's just such a Liv thing to do, turn a birthday party into a business transaction. A few people laughed nervously. My father closed the portfolio and set it on the side table without another word. My mother touched his arm and they moved away, rejoining the other guests as if I'd offered them something vaguely inappropriate rather than $250,000. I stood there alone by the fireplace, my face burning with humiliation. Madison glided past me on her way to refill her wine, leaning in close enough to whisper, Don't look so wounded. You know they don't understand your world. The party dragged on for another 2 hours. I helped clear plates, made small talk with neighbors who asked polite questions about Seattle, and counted the minutes until I could leave without seeming rude. My parents thanked everyone for coming, accepted gifts with genuine warmth and gratitude. Everyone's gifts except mine, which still sat unopened on the side table where my father had abandoned it. By 9 o'clock, the last guests had trickled away. I gathered my things, ready to begin the long drive back, when Madison appeared in the hallway leading to the bedrooms. We were alone for the first time all evening. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. You know, Liv, you really should stop trying so hard. It's kind of sad. I'm not trying anything, I said, keeping my voice level. I was being generous. Were you? Or were you trying to prove something? She pushed off the wall and stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Here's the thing you've never understood. This house, this family, there's only room for one daughter who truly belongs here. And it's not you. I met her eyes, seeing something there I'd seen before in smaller doses over the years. Not just sibling rivalry. Something colder. Something that felt like genuine malice. One day, she continued, her smile never wavering, this house will only welcome one daughter. And you'll finally understand that you were never really part of this family. You were just the responsible one they kept around out of obligation. I wanted to respond to pushback, but exhaustion settled over me like a weight. I'd heard variations of this my entire life, subtle digs, small cruelties, the constant reminder that I was different, and that different meant less than. "Good night, Madison," I said and walked toward the door. I was loading my bag into the car when I saw her through the window. Madison stood in the garden, partially hidden by the rose trellis, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her posture, shoulders hunched, free hand gesturing sharply. She was arguing with someone, her voice too low to hear, but her body language unmistakable. Then she saw me watching. Her entire demeanor shifted in an instant. Shoulders relaxed, smile appearing like she'd flipped a switch. She ended the call quickly, gave me a bright wave, and headed back inside. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. It was probably nothing. Madison had always been dramatic, always had some crisis or conflict brewing. It wasn't my problem. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I saw Madison standing at the living room window watching me leave. Her lips moved, and though I couldn't hear the words, something about the way she stood there triumphant, certain, made my skin prickle with apprehension. I didn't know it then, but she'd just whispered the words that would change everything. She doesn't deserve them, and soon she'll have nothing. I drove back to Seattle that night with an unsettled feeling I couldn't shake, but within 2 days, I'd convinced myself I was overthinking things. Madison had always been dramatic. The whispered phone call, the strange threat in the hallway, these were just more examples of her need for attention, her constant positioning within the family hierarchy. I had worked to focus on clients who actually valued my expertise, a life I'd built far away from the suffocating dynamics of my childhood home. 3 weeks passed. Good weeks, productive ones. I closed a major deal with a biotech startup, brought in 2 new consulting contracts, and finally took a weekend off to hike the trails around Mount Rainier. For those 21 days, I didn't think much about my family or the birthday party, or Madison's cryptic words. I should have known better than to trust silence. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. My father's number. I almost didn't listen to it right away. Conversations with him were always stilted, obligatory exchanges that left me feeling vaguely inadequate, but something made me press play. His voice was different. Colder than I'd ever heard it, each word clipped and precise, like he was reading from a prepared statement. "Olivia, we know what you did. Don't try to explain. There's nothing you can say that will change what we've seen. We're handling this privately for now, but you need to stay away from us. Don't call. Don't come to the house." The message ended abruptly. I stared at my phone, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd just heard. What I did. What was he talking about? I immediately called back, but it rang through to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I called my mother's cell. Voicemail. I tried the house line 3 times before accepting that they weren't going to answer. My hands were shaking as I opened my email and composed a message to both of them, carefully wording my confusion, asking what had happened, what they thought I'd done. I hit send and watched the screen. 2 minutes later, both emails bounced back with automatic replies. "This sender has been blocked." They'd blocked me. My own parents had blocked my number and my email without explanation based on some accusation I didn't even understand. The professional part of my brain, the part that had navigated complex financial disputes and corporate conflicts, kept trying to impose logic on the situation. There had to be a misunderstanding, some piece of information I was missing. But the daughter in me, the one who'd spent 39 years trying and failing to earn their unconditional love, felt something much simpler and more devastating. They'd believed the worst of me without even asking if it was true. I couldn't focus on work. For the rest of that day and into the next, I kept checking my phone, hoping for some clarification, some opening to defend myself against charges I couldn't even name. Nothing came. The silence from Oregon was absolute. Then my professional world began to fracture. It started with a canceled meeting. A client I'd worked with for 3 years, a founder I'd helped secure Series B funding, sent a terse email postponing our quarterly review indefinitely. No explanation. 2 hours later, another client requested all their files be transferred to a different consultant. By the end of the week, I'd lost 4 major accounts. The whispers reached me through a former colleague who still had enough decency to warn me. "Olivia, I don't know what's going on, but there are rumors circulating. People are saying you embezzled from your own family, that you can't be trusted with client funds. I don't believe it, but you need to know what's being said." Embezzlement. The word hit me like a physical blow. Someone was deliberately destroying my reputation, spreading lies through the tight-knit investment community where credibility was everything. And I had a terrible certainty about who that someone was. I tried to trace the source of the rumors, but they seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Anonymous tips concerned warnings passed between colleagues, carefully worded questions that planted seeds of doubt. Whoever was orchestrating this understood exactly how to weaponize professional gossip. Within days, my phone stopped ringing with new business inquiries. Former associates suddenly had no time to meet for coffee. I watched 15 years of careful reputation building evaporate like morning fog. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't defend myself because I didn't know the specific accusations. I couldn't confront my family because they wouldn't speak to me. I existed in a nightmare where I'd been convicted of crimes I didn't understand, sentenced without trial, cut off from everyone who should have stood by me. I hired a lawyer, spent hours reviewing my financial records, searching for anything that could be misconstrued or manipulated. Everything was clean. Every transaction documented and legitimate. But I was beginning to understand that facts might not matter if the lie had been crafted carefully enough, if it had been sold to the right people with enough conviction. Late one night, 2 weeks into this waking nightmare, I sat alone in my apartment staring at my phone. I'd lost almost everything: my family's trust, half my client base, my standing in the professional community. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a constant reminder of all the calls that weren't coming, all the relationships that had been severed. When it finally rang, the sound made me jump. My father's name appeared on the screen. For a fraction of a second, I felt hope. Maybe they'd realized their mistake. Maybe they wanted to hear my side, finally. I answered on the second ring. "Dad." His voice came through the line like a blade made of ice, each word deliberate and final. "From this moment on, never come back to this house again. You are no longer our daughter. We have nothing more to say to you." The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, holding the phone to my ear long after the silence had replaced his voice, trying to understand how thoroughly my life had been dismantled by someone who shared my blood and smiled while doing it. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My father's words played on an endless loop in my mind, each repetition carving deeper into whatever remained of my composure. By 3 a.m, I'd made a decision that the rational part of me knew was probably futile, but desperation has a way of drowning out reason. I was going to Oregon. I was going to stand on their doorstep and make them look me in the eye while they accused me. They could believe lies, but they were going to hear the truth directly from me first. I threw clothes into an overnight bag without really seeing what I grabbed, left a note for my neighbor to water my plants, and was on the road by 4 a.m. The drive felt both endless and too short. With each mile, I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd explain the questions I'd demand they answer. But underneath all that preparation was a simpler, more primal need. I just wanted my parents to believe me. After everything, after 39 years of being the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who never caused problems, I needed them to know I hadn't done this. Dawn was breaking when I pulled into their driveway. The house looked serene in the early morning light, exactly as it always had. Normal, peaceful, a lie of a facade. I walked up to the front door and knocked, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Then I saw movement through the frosted glass panel beside the door. My mother's silhouette. "Mom, Please, I just need 5 minutes to explain. Please open the door." Her voice came through the wood, muffled but clear enough. "We have nothing to say to you, Olivia." "Then just listen. You don't have to say anything. Just let me tell you what actually happened." "We know what happened. We've seen the evidence. The bank statements, the transfers, everything with your name on it." "Those aren't real. Someone fabricated them. Please, Mom, you have to believe me. I would never steal from you. I would never—" "We don't shelter thieves." Her voice rose to a shout that echoed through the quiet morning. "How dare you come here after what you've done? How dare you try to lie to us again?" I pressed my palm against the door, feeling the solid barrier between us, fighting the tears that burned behind my eyes. "I'm not lying. I've never lied to you. Please just open the door and look at me. Look at your daughter and tell me you really believe I could do this." Through the glass, I saw another figure join my mother. Madison. Even through the distortion, I could see her face, eyes red and swollen, tears tracking down her cheeks. One hand clutching our mother's arm, like she needed support to stand. She was still performing, still playing the devastated victim, and our mother was eating it up. I started pounding on the door, then all pretense of calm disintegrating. "Madison, Madison, I know you're behind this. Tell them the truth. Tell them what you did." The door suddenly swung open, but it wasn't my mother or sister standing there. My father filled the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury I'd never seen directed at me before. In his hand was my old suitcase from college, the one I'd left in their attic years ago. "You want your belongings? Here." He hurled the suitcase past me. It tumbled down the front steps, bursting open on impact, scattering clothes and old books and memorabilia across the perfectly manicured lawn. "Dad, please." I said never come back. I meant it. His eyes were hard, unyielding. "You stole from us. You betrayed this family, and now you have the audacity to come here and create a scene." He gestured toward the street, and I realized with horror that neighbors were emerging onto their porches, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Chen from next door stood on her front steps with her phone out. The Johnsons across the street had come outside, openly staring. "I didn't steal anything," I said, but my voice came out broken, desperate. "Please, you have to believe me. The only thing I have to do is protect your mother and sister from you." He stepped back inside and began to close the door. "Don't contact us again. If you come back here, I'll call the police." The door shut with a finality that felt like the end of everything. I stood there on the porch, aware of every eye watching me, every phone potentially recording. My belongings were strewn across the lawn like garbage. The sky had darkened while we'd been talking, and now rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. I should have gotten in my car and left. I should have salvaged what remained of my dignity. Instead, I walked down the steps in a daze and began gathering my scattered things, my hands shaking as rain soaked through my clothes. A photo album lay face down in the wet grass, pictures from my childhood birthday parties and family vacations, and moments that had felt happy once. I picked it up, water already warping the pages. When I finally looked up, the neighbors were still watching. Some had gone back inside, but enough remained to witness my complete humiliation. I carried the suitcase to my car, threw it in the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat with the door closed, shivering from cold and shock and a hurt so profound it felt physical. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. An unknown number. A text message. "They haven't stopped yet. This is only the beginning." My breath caught. The message terrified me in a way the confrontation hadn't, because it suggested this nightmare wasn't ending, it was escalating. Before I could process that thought, another message appeared from the same number. "If you want to fight back, reply to this message. You're not as alone as they want you to believe." I stared at the words through the rain streaming down my windshield, my whole body trembling. Every instinct told me to be suspicious, to ignore anonymous messages from strangers. But I had nothing left to lose. My family had disowned me. My reputation was destroyed. I was sitting in the rain outside the home that had just rejected me with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, with the last fragment of hope I had left, I typed one word, "Who are you?" The response came so quickly they must have been waiting. "Someone who knows the truth about Madison." I stared at those words on my phone screen until they blurred. Someone who knows the truth about Madison. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a cruel prank, another twist in this nightmare. But the timing was too precise, the knowledge too specific. Whoever this was had been watching, waiting for exactly this moment when I had nothing left to lose. I typed back with numb fingers, "How do I know I can trust you?" The response came within seconds. "You don't. But you also don't have any other options right now. Meet me tomorrow. 2 p.m. The Copper Mill Cafe, 15 miles outside Portland. Come alone." I sat in that car for another 20 minutes, rain drumming on the roof, trying to think through the logic of meeting a stranger who'd found me at my lowest point. Every reasonable instinct said no. But reasonable instincts had gotten me thrown out of my family home with my belongings scattered across a wet lawn while neighbors filmed my humiliation. Reasonable had gotten me nowhere. I drove to a hotel that night, checked in under a fog of exhaustion, and barely slept. The next day crawled by with excruciating slowness until finally it was time to drive to the cafe. The Copper Mill turned out to be one of those aggressively rustic places with exposed beams and local art on the walls, far enough from any major city to be genuinely quiet. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner booth where I could watch the door. She walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. I recognized her immediately, though it had been almost 15 years since I'd seen her. Eleanor Gray. We'd been roommates junior and senior year at university, close friends who'd stayed in touch for a few years after graduation, before life and distance pulled us in different directions. She looked different now, more polished, more confident, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that screamed success. But her eyes were the same intelligent, observant kind. She slid into the booth across from me without preamble. "Hello, Liv." "Eleanor." My voice came out hoarse. "I don't understand. How did you know? How did you find me? I've been keeping tabs on your sister for 5 years." She said it calmly, like she was discussing the weather. "After what she did to me, I made it my business to know what she was doing and who she was hurting." "What she did to you?" Eleanor signaled the waitress, ordered 2 coffees, and waited until we were alone again before answering. 5 years ago, I had a startup concept, a financial planning app specifically designed for freelancers and gig workers. I was excited about it, showed it to a few people at a networking event in Portland. Madison was there. We talked. She seemed genuinely interested, asked all the right questions, wanted to collaborate. Eleanor's expression hardened. 3 months later, she launched the exact same concept with a tech bro boyfriend who had investor connections. When it failed spectacularly because neither of them actually understood the market, she told everyone I'd stolen the idea from her and sabotaged the launch. She almost destroyed my career before it really started. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I had no idea. "Of course you didn't. Madison's very good at compartmentalizing her victims, making sure we don't compare notes." Eleanor pulled a leather folder from her bag and slid it across the table. "I rebuilt my career after that. Started my own investment firm, did well enough that I could afford to keep an eye on her. And what I've learned is that you're not her first target, Liv. You're just her biggest one." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, transaction records. My name appeared on several documents, but as I read through them, I could see the inconsistencies. Timestamps that didn't match my travel schedule. Digital signatures that weren't quite right, account numbers I'd never seen before. "This is all fake," I whispered. "Expertly fake, but yes. Someone with serious technical skills and financial connections helped her create this paper trail. I'm guessing her new boyfriend, though. I'm still tracking down his real identity." Eleanor leaned forward. "I've been documenting your sister's schemes for years, Liv. This isn't her first time framing someone. You're just the first time it's been this elaborate, this devastating." The coffee arrived. I wrapped my hands around the cup, needing its warmth. Why didn't you warn me? If you've been watching her, you must have seen this coming. I saw her circling, but I didn't know the specifics until it was already in motion. By the time I realized what she was planning, you'd already been accused. I'm sorry I couldn't prevent it. Eleanor's voice softened. But I can help you now, if you want help. I want my life back. I want my family to know the truth. Do you really think showing them this evidence will change anything? Eleanor tapped the folder. They believed Madison instantly. They threw you out without even asking your side. Even if we present proof, they'll find ways to excuse her. She'll cry claims she was manipulated, play the victim. You know I'm right. I did know. I'd watched Madison weaponize tears and vulnerability my entire life. So what are you suggesting? Stop waiting for justice to find you. Let's create it ourselves. Eleanor's eyes held mine. We can't simply expose Madison because your parents are too invested in believing her. What we need to do is let her destroy herself publicly, spectacularly, in a way that's undeniable. Let her greed and her lies unravel where everyone can see, where even your parents can't look away. The word revenge hung unspoken between us. I'd never thought of myself as someone capable of plotting against another person, even someone who'd hurt me. I was the good daughter, the rule follower, the one who took the high road even when it cost me. They didn't just reject you, Eleanor said quietly. They destroyed you without a second thought. They chose to believe the worst of you without even asking if it was true. You don't owe them mercy, Liv. You owe yourself justice. I thought about my father throwing my suitcase down the steps, my mother shouting that they don't shelter thieves, Madison's fake tears and genuine triumph, the neighbors watching my humiliation, my ruined reputation. Everything I'd built, everything I'd been reduced to rubble by a lie. What would this look like? I heard myself ask. Eleanor pulled out her laptop, opened it, and turned the screen toward me. Madison is currently using your parents' charity fund to launder money. I have documentation showing irregular transfers, shell companies, the whole setup. She's gotten greedy and sloppy. We have about 2 months before she either covers her tracks or gets caught by someone else. 2 months to do what? To trap her. To build a case so airtight that when it comes out, there's no way to spin it, no way to blame anyone else. To make sure that when she falls hard enough that even your parents can't catch her. Eleanor paused. But I need you to be all in, Liv. No hesitation, no backing out because you feel guilty. Can you do that? I looked at the evidence spread across the table, at Eleanor's steady gaze, at the life preserver she was offering me when I was drowning. For my entire life, I'd chosen my family's approval over my own well-being. I'd been the responsible one, the one who absorbed hurt without complaint, the one who always forgave. Not anymore. I'm in, I said. Eleanor smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. Good. Then let's get to work. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened faster than I expected. Within a week of that coffee shop meeting, I'd closed my Seattle apartment, moved into a corporate housing unit in Portland that Eleanor arranged, and begun the process of becoming someone new. Not entirely new. I was still Olivia Ross in legal documents and on my driver's license, but professionally, publicly, I became Liv Gray, Eleanor's strategic partner, a financial consultant with an impressive but carefully vague background, someone who preferred to work behind the scenes away from media attention and public scrutiny. The name felt strange at first, like wearing someone else's clothes, but as days turned into weeks, I found myself inhabiting it more fully. Liv Gray didn't carry the weight of being the overlooked daughter. She didn't flinch at her family's disapproval because she had no family to disappoint. She could be calculating, strategic, even ruthless when necessary, without the guilt that had always held Olivia Ross back. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely free. Eleanor's firm occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower in downtown Portland, all clean lines and expensive furnishings that spoke of serious money and serious power. She gave me an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River and told me to make myself comfortable. We worked long hours those first few weeks, often staying past midnight as we built the framework for what Eleanor called the long game. The centerpiece of our strategy was Gray Ross Holdings. The name was Eleanor's idea, a private joke that made me uncomfortable at first, too close to my real identity, too obvious. But Eleanor explained that was precisely the point. "We're hiding in plain sight," she said. "Madison will see the name and think it's a coincidence. She's too self-absorbed to imagine you'd have the audacity to use your own name against her." We registered Gray Ross Holdings as a legitimate investment and consulting firm, seeded it with enough of Eleanor's capital to make it credible, and began carefully positioning it in the exact spaces where Madison was operating. Eleanor had been tracking my sister's business activities for years, so she knew Madison's patterns intimately. Madison was drawn to flashy tech ventures and real estate deals. Anything that promised quick returns and impressive-sounding credentials she could drop at parties. She wanted to look successful more than she wanted to actually be successful. I spent hours studying the files Eleanor had compiled. 5 years of documentation showing Madison's schemes, her targets, her methods. A startup founder she'd convinced to make her a partner, then pushed out after securing investor connections. A small real estate firm where she'd lasted 6 months before being quietly asked to leave over unexplained financial irregularities. A pattern of entering situations, extracting what she needed, and leaving damage in her wake. Each case had been handled privately, settled quietly because the victims either couldn't prove wrongdoing or didn't want the publicity. "She's gotten away with it because she's charming and people want to believe her," Eleanor explained one evening as we reviewed documents. "And because she's always chosen targets who were vulnerable, isolated, or too afraid of public scandal to fight back. But she's also gotten careless. Each scheme has been bigger than the last. She's addicted to the thrill of it." Learning to think like Madison was disturbing but necessary. I had to understand what motivated her, what triggered her competitive instincts, what made her overreach. Eleanor taught me patience, the art of strategic waiting. "True revenge isn't about causing someone pain," she said. "It's about creating the conditions where they destroy themselves while thinking they're winning. We're not attacking Madison. We're building a trap and letting her walk into it." Our first real move came 6 weeks into the plan. Gray Ross Holdings submitted a proposal for a major commercial development project in downtown Eugene. It was exactly the kind of high-profile deal Madison's company had been pursuing, complete with city contracts and investor attention. Our proposal was better researched, more financially sound, and backed by Eleanor's reputation. We won the contract. I found out Madison's reaction through a local business reporter Eleanor had cultivated. Madison had been furious, apparently had called the city planning office demanding to know who Liv Gray was and why her proposal had been chosen over Madison's. The reporter quoted her as saying the decision was clearly based on connections rather than merit, which was ironic coming from someone who'd built her entire career on exploiting connections. 2 days later, Madison gave an interview to a regional business magazine. Eleanor and I watched it together on her laptop, sitting side by side in her office after everyone else had gone home. Madison wore a dove gray suit and her most professional smile, talking about market trends and innovation. When the interviewer asked about increased competition in the regional market, Madison's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "There are always new players entering the field," she said smoothly. "Some have interesting approaches. Liv Gray, for instance, has brought some innovative strategies to the table. I actually admire her ability to secure projects quickly. It keeps the rest of us on our toes." The words were complimentary, but her eyes told a different story. I could see the anger simmering beneath the polished surface, the barely contained fury at being outmaneuvered by someone she didn't know and couldn't control. Eleanor paused the video, freezing on Madison's tight smile. "She's rattled. That's good." I stared at my sister's face on the screen, at the performance of gracious professionalism masking genuine threat perception. For the first time since that awful morning in the rain outside my parents' house, I felt something other than pain and confusion. I felt powerful. capable. Like maybe, just maybe, I could win this. She just complimented me without knowing it, I said and heard the smile in my own voice. This might actually work. Eleanor closed the laptop and turned to face me fully. It's going to work, Liv, because she has no idea what's coming, and by the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. Success bred confidence, and confidence bred ambition. Within 3 months of losing the Eugene contract to us, Madison announced her most ambitious project, yet a $5 million commercial real estate development in downtown Portland. Mixed-use buildings, luxury condos, street-level retail space. The kind of project that would cement her reputation as a serious player if it succeeded. Eleanor showed me the press release over morning coffee, and I saw immediately what Madison was doing. She was overreaching, trying to prove she could compete on a larger scale, trying to show that losing one contract meant nothing. Your parents are backing this, Eleanor said, tapping the article. Their names are listed as primary investors. She's putting their money on the line. I felt a complicated twist of emotions reading that. Part of me wanted to warn them to somehow communicate that they were being used. But they'd made their choice when they threw me out without listening. They'd chosen to believe Madison's lies, chosen to fund her schemes, chosen to see me as the villain. Whatever happened next, they'd participated in creating it. Eleanor had sources everywhere, including a junior accountant at Madison's firm, who was growing increasingly uncomfortable with what he was seeing. The documents he quietly copied and passed along told a disturbing story. Madison was forging signatures on financial reports, inflating projected returns, taking loans from sources that had no legitimate business addresses. When Eleanor traced the money, it led to a network of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, all ultimately controlled by someone named Richard Caldwell. Who is he? I asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He's very good at staying invisible. Eleanor pulled up what little information she'd found, a Miami address, a few mentions in business filings, nothing substantial. But whoever he is, he's got his hooks deep in your sister's operation. And these loans, they're not legitimate financing. This is the kind of money that comes with strings attached. We made our move carefully. Eleanor had contacts at the IRS and the State Financial Regulatory Board, people who could be trusted to investigate credible tips without revealing their sources. We provided them with copies of the forged documents, highlighted the suspicious transactions, laid out a clear trail of financial irregularities. Then we waited. The investigation became public within 3 weeks. A terse press release from the State Regulatory Board announcing an inquiry into potential financial misconduct at Madison's firm. The local business press picked it up immediately. I watched from my office as the story spread, as reporters started asking questions, as Madison's carefully constructed image began developing cracks. My parents issued a statement through their lawyer. They stood behind their daughter, completely believed she was the victim of malicious sabotage by jealous competitors, and had full confidence the investigation would clear her name. Reading their words, I felt a familiar ache. They'd given Madison the benefit of doubt they'd never offered me. Even now, faced with an official investigation, they chose blind loyalty to her over the possibility that she might be guilty. I started monitoring Madison more closely after that, watching for signs of how the pressure was affecting her. Eleanor had installed sophisticated monitoring software that tracked Madison's digital footprint, her public appearances, even her social media activity. What we saw was someone slowly coming apart. She'd always been polished, punctual, meticulously put together. Now she was showing up late to meetings, her makeup slightly smudged, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. In a video from a Chamber of Commerce breakfast, I watched her lose her train of thought mid-sentence, then laugh it off with a joke that didn't quite land. Her hands shook slightly when she reached for her water glass. She's not sleeping, Eleanor observed. Look at the timestamps on her emails. She's sending messages at 3-4 in the morning. That's not normal work habits. That's anxiety. But it was a phone call that changed everything. Eleanor had arranged for monitoring equipment in Madison's office, legally questionable, but untraceable, and one afternoon we caught a conversation that made my blood run cold. Madison was alone in her office, speaking to someone on her cell phone, her voice rising with each sentence. "I did everything you asked, Richard. I forged the signatures like you showed me. I took the loans from your contacts. I've been following your instructions exactly." Her voice cracked and I could hear genuine fear beneath the words. "When will this be enough? When can I stop?" The response was inaudible to us, but whatever Richard said made Madison go quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was small, defeated. "I understand. Yes, I'll handle it. I won't disappoint you." The call ended. Through the audio feed, I could hear Madison crying harsh sobs that sounded nothing like the performative tears she'd used on our parents. These were the sounds of someone genuinely terrified. I sat back in my chair, the recording still playing through my earbuds. I'd spent months thinking of Madison as the architect of my destruction, the calculating villain who'd deliberately ruined my life. But that phone call told a different story. She sounded like a puppet being controlled by someone pulling strings she couldn't see. Eleanor had been listening too on her own set of headphones. When the recording ended, she removed them slowly and met my eyes across the desk. "Phase 1 is complete, Liv," she said quietly. "Now we let her self-destruct, but watch carefully. She's terrified of someone." I nodded, but my mind was racing. If Madison wasn't the mastermind, if she was being manipulated by this Richard Caldwell person, then everything I thought I understood about my situation had just shifted. The enemy might be bigger than I'd realized. The trap we'd set might catch more than just my sister. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a question formed that I wasn't ready to examine too closely. If Madison was a victim too, did that change what I was doing to her? The question of whether Madison deserved sympathy stayed with me for exactly 3 days. Then the story broke, and sympathy became irrelevant in the face of facts. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor called me at 6 a.m., her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Turn on the news, any channel." I grabbed my laptop and pulled up a major financial news site. The headline dominated the screen: "Ross family accused of financial misconduct investigation reveals forged documents and illegal loans." Below it, 3 more outlets had published similar stories simultaneously, all meticulously detailed, all citing anonymous sources and leaked documents. The coordination was perfect. Eleanor and I had spent weeks cultivating relationships with journalists, feeding them pieces of the puzzle, waiting for the moment when they'd all publish at once, and create an avalanche Madison couldn't outrun. The articles were devastating. They outlined the forged signatures on loan applications, the shell companies funneling money through offshore accounts, the misuse of my parents' charitable foundation funds. Most damaging were the quotes from former employees and business partners, people who'd seen questionable practices but had been too afraid to speak up until now. Madison's carefully constructed image as a rising business star was being systematically dismantled in real time. I watched it unfold from Eleanor's office, both of us glued to our screens as the story metastasized across media platforms. By 9 a.m., investors in Madison's real estate project had issued statements withdrawing their funding. By noon, business partners were scrambling to distance themselves, issuing carefully worded press releases about concerns regarding financial transparency. The family's reputation, built carefully over 3 generations, was collapsing within hours. Madison tried to fight back. She held a hastily arranged press conference that afternoon, standing outside her office building, looking haggard despite obvious attempts to appear composed. I watched her stumble through a prepared statement, contradicting herself twice, claiming the accusations were completely fabricated, while simultaneously saying she'd been misled by advisors. Her lawyer kept trying to interject to stop her from speaking, but Madison was in full damage control mode and couldn't seem to stop talking. Each word made it worse. The real detonation came that evening. Someone Eleanor suspected the housekeeper who'd been with my parents for 15 years and had apparently seen too much leaked audio from inside my parents' home. The recording was grainy but clear enough. Madison's voice shrill with panic, screaming at our mother, "You signed those documents! Your signature is on half of them. If anyone goes to prison, it should be you, not me." My mother's response was inaudible, but Madison's next words came through clearly. I did this for us, for this family. You wanted me to be successful, to compete with precious, perfect Olivia, and now you're going to abandon me just like you abandoned her." The recording cut off there, but the damage was absolute. The narrative shifted instantly from ambitious businesswoman under investigation to family conspiracy with internal blame shifting. News outlets played the clip repeatedly, analyzing every word. My parents issued no statement. Their lawyer issued no statement. The silence was damning. Eleanor and I sat in her office late that night watching the news cycle devour my family's reputation. She'd ordered Thai food that neither of us had touched. The screens showed Madison's press conference on loop my parents' house, surrounded by news vans, speculation about criminal charges. "You did it," Eleanor said quietly. "Everything we planned, it's working exactly as we designed." I didn't respond immediately. I walked to my desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder I'd kept hidden since the beginning. The label read, "Ross Investigation Private," and was dated 2 weeks after I'd been thrown out of my parents' house. Eleanor's eyes widened as I set it on her desk. "What is that?" "The truth," I said. "The complete truth about Madison's fraud, her forged documents, Richard Caldwell's involvement, everything. A private investigator compiled it 3 months ago." Eleanor opened the folder slowly, scanning the contents. Her face went through several expressions: confusion, shock, and finally something like awe. "You had this the whole time. You had evidence to clear your name immediately. I hired the investigator the day after they threw me out. He had preliminary findings within a week, complete documentation within 2. I sat down across from her. "I could have taken this to my parents, proven Madison set me up, cleared my name. They might have believed me. They might have apologized. But you didn't." "No, because I realized something standing in that rain outside their house with my belongings scattered across the lawn." I met Eleanor's eyes. If I'd cleared my name immediately, they would have found a way to excuse Madison. They'd say she was confused or manipulated or made a mistake. They'd find someone else to blame, Richard probably, or business advisors, or me for not being clearer about my finances. They'd protect her because that's what they've always done. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying me with new understanding. "So you let it play out. You let them commit fully to believing her, defending her, investing in her schemes. I let them reveal who they really are, who they've always been." I gestured at the news coverage still playing on the screens. "Now there's no ambiguity, no room for excuses. Madison's fraud is public record. My parents' complicity is documented. The recordings show them turning on each other. When the truth comes out about my innocence, there won't be any way for them to rewrite the narrative." "When did you decide?" Eleanor asked. "When did clearing your name stop being enough?" I thought back to that moment standing in the rain, my mother's voice still echoing in my ears. The moment my mother said, "Don't ever come back." That's when I realized I didn't want vindication. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd thrown away. Eleanor closed the folder carefully. We sat in silence for a moment, watching Madison's press conference replay on one of the monitors. She looked desperate, cornered, nothing like the confident woman who'd whispered threats in hallways. "Be careful, Liv," Eleanor finally said, her voice carrying a warning I hadn't heard from her before. "When people like Madison fall, they don't fall alone. They grab everyone nearby and pull them down too. She's going to thrash, she's going to lash out, and you need to be ready for whatever she does next." I nodded, but part of me wondered if Madison had any fight left. She looked broken already, and we'd barely begun. I was wrong about that. Madison had plenty of fight left, and what she did next would force me to question everything I thought I understood about my family, my sister, and the nature of revenge itself. Madison reached out to Liv Gray exactly 1 week after the media firestorm began. Eleanor's assistant forwarded the email with a brief note, "She's biting." I read Madison's message 3 times, studying every word choice, every carefully constructed phrase. She wrote that she'd been following Liv Gray's career with admiration, that she was facing unprecedented challenges due to malicious rumors and coordinated attacks, and that she needed guidance from someone with integrity and vision. The desperation bled through despite her attempts at professional composure. Eleanor and I spent 2 days preparing for the video call. We couldn't risk Madison recognizing me, so Eleanor brought in a professional makeup artist who specialized in corporate transformations. She darkened my skin tone, slightly changed my eyebrow shape, fitted me with brown contact lenses to replace my natural blue ones, and styled my hair in a sleek bob I'd never worn before. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger, someone more polished, more severe, more powerful than Olivia Ross had ever been. "Remember," Eleanor coached me the morning of the call, "you're not Olivia trying to fool Madison. You're Liv Gray, successful consultant who's considering whether to take on a troubled client. Confidence, not caution. She needs to believe you're doing her a favor." The video call was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Madison appeared on screen looking nothing like the composed woman I'd seen at our mother's birthday party. Her skin was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her smile brittle and forced. She wore a burgundy blazer that looked expensive, but couldn't hide how much weight she'd lost. "Miss Gray, thank you so much for taking this meeting," she began, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I know you're incredibly busy, and I appreciate you making time for me." "I've been following the situation with your company," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "It's concerning. Tell me your side of what happened." Madison launched into her prepared narrative. She'd been misled by advisors, she claimed. She'd trusted the wrong people, signed documents she shouldn't have, failed to verify information she should have questioned. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. "I was young, ambitious, too eager to prove myself, but I never intended to hurt anyone. I certainly never intended to damage my family's reputation." I watched her perform vulnerability with the skill of someone who'd done it countless times before. The trembling hands, the eyes that glistened with unshed tears, the voice that wavered at precisely calculated moments. It was masterful. It was also completely transparent to someone who'd grown up watching her manipulate people with these exact techniques. "What are you looking for from me?" I asked. "Help, guidance, someone who can look at my situation objectively and help me rebuild." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I need someone with your reputation to restructure my projects, restore investor confidence, save what can be saved. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Whatever it takes. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Restructuring a situation like this requires complete authority," I said carefully. "I'd need full management control, the ability to make decisions without interference or second-guessing. Are you prepared for that level of oversight?" "Yes," Madison said immediately. "Absolutely. Whatever you need." Eleanor's legal team had spent weeks crafting the contract. It was technically a power of attorney delegation agreement giving Liv Gray's firm complete management authority over all assets and projects under Madison's control for a period of 5 years. The document included buyback options that were theoretically available if all debts were repaid with interest within 3 years, but the financial structure made that essentially impossible. Most importantly, it was completely legal because Madison's parents had previously granted her full power of attorney over family assets, trusting her to make decisions on their behalf. She had the legal right to delegate that authority to external management during a financial crisis. Eleanor's lawyers had confirmed it from every angle. "I'll have my team send over the management agreement," I said. "Review it carefully with your attorney. This is a significant commitment." "I trust you," Madison said, and the irony of those words nearly broke my composure. "Everyone in the industry speaks highly of your integrity. I know I'll be in good hands." The contract arrived in Madison's inbox within an hour. I watched through our monitoring system as she opened it, saw her scroll through the pages too quickly. Eleanor sat beside me, tracking Madison's digital activity in real time. "She's not reading it carefully," Eleanor murmured. "She's skimming." 6 hours later, the signed contract appeared in my inbox. Madison had barely read it, had consulted no attorney, had signed away control of everything she and my parents owned, without understanding what she was actually agreeing to. Eleanor's legal team verified the signatures and notarization within minutes. It was binding, ironclad, devastating. I called Madison to confirm receipt. Her face on the video screen showed pure relief, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've saved my life, Ms. Gray. I won't forget this." "I'll be in touch about next steps," I said, maintaining Liv Gray's professional distance. "We'll begin the restructuring process immediately." After the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the signed document on my screen. Madison's signature was bold, confident, completely trusting. She'd just sold everything: her control, her parents' assets, the family business to the sister she'd destroyed, and she had no idea. This should have felt like triumph. This was the moment we'd been building toward, the trap finally sprung. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, like I'd won something that didn't matter anymore. Eleanor came to stand beside my desk, looking down at the contract on my screen. She was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "She just sold her soul for $0, she whispered. "Welcome to your own downfall, Madison." I nodded but couldn't bring myself to respond. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice asked whether this was justice or just another form of destruction. I pushed the thought away. I'd come too far to question the path now. Madison had made her choices. So had my parents. And now, finally, so had I. The restructuring process began immediately, and Madison followed every recommendation I made as Liv Gray with desperate, unquestioning trust. I reviewed her remaining assets, analyzed the family's financial position, and presented what I called a recovery strategy designed to restore investor confidence and generate quick returns. At the center of this strategy was Richard Caldwell's Caldwell Leverage Fund, a real estate investment vehicle that promised extraordinary returns through aggressive use of financial leverage. Eleanor had tracked Richard's fund for months, understanding its structure with clinical precision. It used 10-to-1 leverage, meaning every dollar invested commanded $10 of buying power in commercial real estate markets. On paper, the mathematics were seductive. If the market rose even modestly, returns would be spectacular. But leverage cuts both ways. A small decline triggers margin calls, forced liquidations, catastrophic losses. It was a time bomb disguised as an opportunity, and I was about to hand Madison the detonator. I presented the investment to her in a video conference, walking through projected returns, explaining how the fund had generated consistent profits for sophisticated investors, emphasizing Richard's personal guarantee of double returns within 6 months. I watched Madison's face as I spoke, saw hope kindle in her exhausted eyes. She wanted so badly to believe this would save everything. "This is the family's last significant capital," she said carefully. $50 million. If we lose this, there's nothing left. "I understand the stakes," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "That's why I'm recommending a fund with this track record and these protections. Mr. Caldwell has guaranteed the returns personally. The risk profile is acceptable given your current situation." What I didn't say, what I couldn't say, was that I knew the commercial real estate market was poised to collapse. Interest rates were rising faster than anyone expected, and leveraged funds would be the first casualties. Eleanor and I had seen the warning signs for months, had positioned our own investments accordingly. Gray Ross Holdings had quietly exited every leveraged position weeks ago. We were protected. The Ross family was about to be obliterated. Madison signed the investment authorization the same day. $50 million, everything my parents had left their retirement, their legacy, 3 generations of accumulated wealth flowed into Richard Caldwell's fund within 48 hours. The market held stable for 3 weeks. Then the Federal Reserve announced an emergency interest rate hike larger than anyone had predicted, designed to combat inflation that had spiraled beyond their projections. Commercial real estate values began dropping immediately. Not dramatically at first, just steady erosion that gathered momentum like an avalanche beginning to slide. I watched it happen in real time from Eleanor's office, both of us monitoring market data and the Caldwell Fund's positions. The fund's automatic margin call triggers activated within hours. When leveraged positions lose value, lenders demand immediate capital to cover potential losses. Richard's fund didn't have reserves, it was leveraged to the maximum every dollar committed. The margin calls forced automatic liquidation of positions at the worst possible moment, selling assets into a falling market, crystallizing losses that might have been recoverable with time. Within 48 hours, the entire $50 million was gone. Not reduced, not diminished, completely evaporated, consumed by margin calls and forced liquidations. The mathematics of 10-to-1 leverage meant a 10% market decline resulted in total loss. It was exactly what Eleanor and I had known would happen. It was exactly what I'd engineered by pushing Madison toward this investment. The media coverage was immediate and merciless. Financial news outlets compared it to the Archegos Capital collapse of 2021, when a single fund's over-leveraged positions imploded and wiped out billions in a matter of days. But this time, the story had a more compelling human angle. A once prominent family destroyed by their own ambition and poor judgment. They called it the Ross family meltdown. News cameras captured my father leaving the family home for the last time, carrying a single box of personal items. The house had been sold to cover debts the furniture auctioned the life they'd built systematically dismantled. He looked decades older than when I'd last seen him, his shoulders hunched, his face gray with shock and grief. My mother walked beside him, crying quietly, and I had to look away from the screen. The most devastating footage came from outside their attorney's office. Madison emerged drunk and barely able to stand, mascara streaking down her face, and collapsed to her knees on the sidewalk. My parents stood a few feet away, frozen. Madison reached toward them, sobbing incoherently. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I tried to fix everything. I only wanted to help. Please, I didn't mean it." My father's response was captured by a dozen microphones. His voice, when he finally spoke, was raw with pain and rage. "We lost everything because of you 3 generations. Gone. All because we trusted you." Meanwhile, financial media outlets were running a very different story about Liv Gray. Articles praised her prescient warnings about the commercial real estate bubble, her strategic positioning ahead of the crash, her firm's impressive returns, while others hemorrhaged capital. Business journals called her the woman who predicted it all and requested interviews. Portfolio managers wanted to know her methods. She was being held up as an example of brilliant financial analysis and disciplined risk management. I read these articles sitting alone in my apartment late at night, unable to feel anything resembling satisfaction. Each headline praising Liv Gray felt like an indictment of what I'd become. I'd set this in motion. I'd pushed Madison toward Richard's fund, knowing exactly what would happen. I'd documented everything, protected myself, and watched from safety while my family was destroyed. Eleanor kept telling me this was justice, that they'd brought this on themselves through their choices and their blind loyalty to Madison. But watching my father's broken expression on the news, seeing my mother's tears, witnessing Madison's complete psychological collapse, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like I'd become the very thing I'd accused them of being, someone who destroyed family without mercy. The final piece of footage that cycle showed Madison outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, her lawyer trying desperately to pull her away from the cameras. She looked directly into the lens, her face a mask of betrayal and dawning comprehension, and screamed, "Where is Liv Gray? She promised to help me. She told me this was safe. Where is she? She ruined me." The lawyer finally succeeded in dragging her to a waiting car, but those words played on repeat across every news channel. I watched Madison's face frozen in that moment of realization, the instant she understood she'd been manipulated, that the help she'd trusted had been poison disguised as medicine. Eleanor came to my apartment that night, found me sitting in the dark with those words echoing from the television. She sat beside me without speaking for a long time. "She knows," I finally said. "She doesn't know who Liv Gray really is yet, but she knows she was played." "Yes," Eleanor agreed quietly. "And now, the real reckoning begins." Madison's accusations against Liv Gray spread like wildfire through financial media and social platforms. She gave interviews claiming she'd been deliberately misled, that Liv Gray had recommended investments knowing they would fail, that the entire consulting relationship had been a setup designed to destroy what remained of the Ross family fortune. Her lawyer tried to control the narrative, but Madison was beyond controlling. She was desperate, broken, and increasingly willing to say anything that might shift blame away from herself. Eleanor called an emergency meeting 3 days after Madison's courthouse outburst. "We need to get ahead of this," she said, her expression grave. "Madison's accusations are gaining traction. People are starting to ask questions about Liv Gray's background, her credentials, why there's so little public information about her. We have maybe 48 hours before someone digs deep enough to connect you to the Ross family." "So what do you suggest?" "We control the revelation. We tell the story on our terms in our timing before someone else does." Eleanor pulled up a press release draft on her laptop. "Press conference tomorrow afternoon. Major media outlets. And we tell them everything." The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at a downtown Portland hotel. Eleanor's team sent invitations to every major financial news outlet, every business journalist who'd been covering the Ross family collapse. The invitation was deliberately vague. Gray Financial Consulting to address recent allegations and reveal significant information regarding the Ross family case. The ambiguity ensured maximum attendance. I spent the morning preparing not just mentally, but physically. I removed the brown contact lenses, let my natural blonde hair show, wore a navy suit that Olivia Ross might have chosen rather than something Liv Gray would wear. I was done hiding. Whatever happened next, it would happen as myself. The hotel conference room was packed when we arrived. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters filled every seat. The energy was electric with anticipation. They expected a standard corporate defense, perhaps some legal maneuvering, maybe a countersuit announcement. They had no idea what was actually coming. Eleanor took the podium first, her presence commanding immediate silence. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Eleanor Gray, CEO of Gray Financial Consulting. I've called this press conference to address accusations made against my firm and specifically against my partner, Liv Gray." She paused, letting the room settle into complete attention. "But before I do that, I need to correct a fundamental misunderstanding. Liv Gray is not her real name. It's a professional designation she adopted for specific reasons that will become clear." I watched journalists lean forward, pens poised, cameras focusing. "Liv Gray," Eleanor continued, her voice steady and clear, "is Olivia Ross. She is the daughter the Ross family destroyed based on lies. She is the woman they accused of embezzlement without evidence, threw out of their home without hearing her defense, and disowned based entirely on Madison Ross's fabricated accusations. After they destroyed her reputation and her career, Olivia Ross built this company. She became the financial consultant who predicted the market crash that destroyed her family's fortune. She became the person who could have saved them if they had believed her instead of believing lies." The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions, cameras swiveled toward me. The noise level rose instantly to chaos. Eleanor raised her hand for silence, but had to wait nearly a minute before the room quieted enough for her to continue. "Ms. Ross will make a brief statement. She will not be taking questions at this time." I stood and walked to the podium on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Every eye in the room was on me, every camera recording. This moment would define how the story was told, how I would be remembered. I gripped the edges of the podium and looked directly into the cameras. "My name is Olivia Ross. 6 months ago, my family accused me of stealing $500,000 based on forged documents and fabricated evidence created by my sister Madison. They believed her accusations without asking for my side. They threw me out of their home, blocked my calls and emails, and destroyed my professional reputation by spreading rumors that I was a financial criminal." My voice was steady, though my hands trembled slightly. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did this so the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. They didn't just accuse me falsely. They never asked if I was innocent. They chose to believe the worst of me because it was easier than questioning the daughter they preferred. I paused, letting those words settle across the room. I had evidence of my innocence within 2 weeks of being disowned. I could have cleared my name immediately, but I realized that if I did, they would find ways to excuse my sister's actions. They would blame her boyfriend or bad advisors, or claim she made an honest mistake. So I let them commit fully to their choice. I let them reveal who they really were, what they really valued, and now everyone can see the truth. The room was absolutely silent now, every person hanging on my words. I built a successful consulting firm under a different name. I predicted the market crash that destroyed my family's wealth. Not because I engineered it, but because I'm actually good at what I do, something they never bothered to acknowledge. They lost everything, not because I sabotaged them, but because they trusted the wrong daughter and made catastrophically poor financial decisions. I didn't destroy the Ross family. They destroyed themselves. I stepped back from the podium. Eleanor moved to end the press conference, but I raised my hand to stop her. There was one more thing that needed to be said. To my parents and my sister, you made your choices. You chose lies over truth, favoritism over fairness, and pride over love. Those choices had consequences. I hope they were worth it. I turned and walked out through a side door as reporters erupted with shouted questions behind me. Eleanor's security team formed a barrier preventing anyone from following. I made it to the car before my composure finally cracked my hands, shaking so badly I couldn't fasten my seatbelt. Eleanor slid into the driver's seat, said nothing, just drove. She understood I needed silence to process what I'd just done. The revelation was out there now, spreading across every platform, reframing the entire narrative. By evening, social media would be analyzing every word. By tomorrow, the story would be national news. My phone was already exploding with notifications. I turned it off without looking. We drove for an hour in silence before I finally spoke. Take me to their house. Liv, maybe you should wait. Now. I need to do this now while I still have the courage. Eleanor changed direction without further argument. She knew me well enough to understand that some conversations couldn't be delayed, that some confrontations had to happen in the immediate aftermath, while the truth was still raw and undeniable. My parents' new house was in a cheaper neighborhood on the outskirts of town, a modest rental that probably cost less per month than they used to spend on lawn service. The driveway was empty, the yard was unkempt. Everything about it screamed downward mobility dreams reduced to survival. I knocked on the door. My father answered, and for a moment we just stared at each other. He looked devastated, hollowed out a shell of the confident man who'd thrown my suitcase down the steps. "You didn't just lose money," I said, my voice cold and level. "You lost me." I turned and walked back to the car before he could respond, before I could see whether my words had landed or bounced off the armor of his pride. Behind me, I heard the door close quietly, not slammed, just closed like the final punctuation on a relationship that had been dying for 39 years. The phone calls started the next morning. My father's number appeared on my screen 6 times before noon, each call going to voicemail. I listened to the first message and deleted the rest without playing them. His voice was stripped of all the authority I remembered, reduced to pleading, "Olivia, please, we need to talk. We're facing complete bankruptcy. The creditors are demanding payment. We have nowhere else to turn. Please, just call us back." For 3 days I let them call. Let them leave increasingly desperate messages. Let them understand what it felt like to be ignored by family when you needed them most. On the 4th day, Eleanor found me staring at my phone, the message count climbing higher. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. "Eventually, when I'm ready." I looked up at her. They spent 6 months refusing to hear anything I had to say. They can wait a few more days. But by the end of that week, curiosity overcame my anger. I needed to see them face to face one final time, needed to hear what they'd say, now that the power dynamic had completely reversed. I called my father back and agreed to meet at their rental house the following afternoon. The neighborhood looked worse in daylight than it had during my previous visit. Chain link fences, cracked sidewalks, houses with peeling paint and overgrown yards. This was where 3 generations of Ross family wealth had ended up in a rented duplex that probably cost $800 a month. My mother answered the door. She'd aged dramatically in 6 months, her hair now entirely gray, her face lined with stress and grief. "Olivia," she whispered and tried to reach for me. I stepped back, keeping physical distance between us. "You wanted to talk. Let's talk." The living room was nearly empty. A worn couch, a folding table, 2 plastic chairs. Everything valuable had been sold to pay debts. My father sat on the couch, his hands clasped between his knees, looking at the floor. When I entered, he stood awkwardly, as if unsure whether to approach me or maintain distance. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know we don't deserve your time." "No, you don't." I remained standing, refusing the chair my mother offered. "You have 5 minutes. Say whatever you need to say." My father's composure crumbled immediately. "We were wrong. About everything. Madison lied to us, manipulated us, and we believed her without question. We threw you away based on fabricated evidence. We destroyed our own daughter because we were too blind to see the truth." His voice broke. "We're facing complete financial ruin. 30 million in debts, creditors threatening legal action. We'll lose everything, including this place. We have nowhere to go. And you want me to save you. We're begging you." My mother moved closer, her hands twisted together. "I know we don't deserve your help. But please, Olivia, we're your parents. We made terrible mistakes, but we're still family." The word family hung in the air between us, hollow and meaningless. I looked at both of them, these people who'd given me life but never really given me love, and felt nothing but cold detachment. Before I make any decisions, I need complete honesty. No more lies, no more protecting Madison. I want the truth about everything. I turned to my mother. "Start with how Madison convinced you I was guilty." My mother's face went pale. She glanced at my father, then back at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, guilt, the look of someone who knows they're about to confess something unforgivable. "Tell her," I said flatly. "Whatever it is you're hiding, tell me now." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in for so long they'd become toxic. "I overheard her, on the phone with Richard, 2 days before she accused you. She was in the garden and I was upstairs with the window open. I heard her say, 'We'll frame Olivia for the embezzlement. Transfer the money through accounts with her name. My parents will believe me over her, they always have.'" The room went completely silent. Even the ambient street noise seemed to fade away. My father's head snapped up, staring at my mother with an expression of absolute horror. "You heard that," he whispered. "You knew she was lying from the beginning." I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe I misunderstood. My mother's voice was desperate now, tears streaming down her face. Madison was my baby. She'd always been so fragile, so troubled. I convinced myself that if I confronted her, if I questioned her, she'd fall apart completely. And Olivia... She looked at me, pleading for understanding. "You were always so strong, so capable. I thought you could handle it. I thought you'd be fine." "You thought I'd be fine?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. "You stood by and watched Madison destroy my reputation, my career, my life. You helped throw me out of this family. And you did it knowing I was innocent." My father rose from the couch, his face twisted with rage. You knew, and said nothing." He turned on my mother with a fury I'd never seen from him. "Our daughter was innocent, and you let us destroy her. How could you do that?" "I was trying to hold this family together," my mother screamed back. "If I'd told the truth, Madison would have collapsed. She'd always needed us more than Olivia did. I made a choice to protect the one who couldn't survive without us." "You made a choice to sacrifice me," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "You chose Madison over truth, over justice, over me." My father sank back onto the couch, his face in his hands. The silence that followed was broken only by my mother's crying. I watched them both. These people who'd shaped my childhood and then discarded me like I was disposable, and felt the last vestiges of daughterly obligation evaporate. "I'll pay your debts," I said finally. "All 30 million. I'll save you from bankruptcy." My mother's face lit up with desperate hope. My father looked up, tears streaming down his face. "But there are conditions," I continued. "You will sign a complete waiver of inheritance rights. You will transfer ownership of the family home back to me. It's worth about 5 million now. You can live there for the rest of your lives rent-free, but you will own nothing. No assets, no property, nothing to leave to Madison or anyone else. Everything you have will be mine, held in trust, dispensed as I see fit. That's the price." "Olivia, please," my mother began. "Those are the terms. Accept them or face bankruptcy and homelessness. You have 24 hours to decide." My father's hands shook as he reached for the pen I'd placed on the table along with the documents Eleanor's lawyers had prepared. He didn't even read them, just signed page after page, giving away every last shred of financial autonomy and pride. When he finished, I gathered the documents without a word. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back at my mother. She stood, frozen mascara running down her face, waiting for forgiveness or condemnation or something that would make sense of what had just happened. "You didn't just let Madison destroy me," I said quietly. "You stood there and watched. You heard her plan it, and you chose silence. That's worse than anything she did, because she's broken and desperate. But you knew better, and you did it anyway." I left them in that empty room and didn't look back. Taking control of Ross Holdings felt surreal, like stepping into a building I'd watched burn from a distance, and finding myself suddenly responsible for rebuilding it from the ashes. The company my grandfather had founded, that my father had expanded, that Madison had nearly destroyed, it was mine now. Completely, legally, irrevocably mine. Eleanor's legal team had ensured every document was airtight, every transfer of authority properly executed. The empire that had rejected me was now under my absolute control. My first day in the executive office, I sat behind a desk that had belonged to 3 generations of Ross family leaders and felt nothing but cold determination. The company was hemorrhaging money, drowning in bad investments. Madison had made, weighed down by contracts that served no purpose except inflating her ego. I spent the first week simply understanding the damage, cataloging every poor decision, every nepotistic hire, every corner cut in pursuit of appearances over substance. The restructuring was surgical and merciless. I fired 17 employees in the first month, every person Madison had hired based on social connections rather than qualifications. Every yes man who'd enabled her worst impulses, every manager who'd looked the other way when the numbers didn't add up. I brought in Eleanor's team to implement transparent financial practices, created oversight committees, established accountability measures that should have existed from the beginning. The people who remained worked harder than they ever had under Madison, but they also knew exactly where they stood and what was expected of them. Within 6 weeks, the company had stabilized. Within 3 months, we were profitable again. The business press coverage was relentless and largely favorable. They called me the Iron Sister, the woman who'd been destroyed by her family and rose to rebuild their empire with ruthless efficiency. Forbes ran a profile with my photograph and the headline, "From Outcast to Empire, How Olivia Ross Reclaimed Her Legacy." I read these articles with detachment, understanding they were creating a narrative that would define me, but feeling disconnected from the woman they described. Madison, meanwhile, had completely vanished from public view. After her courthouse breakdown, after the revelation of my identity, she'd simply disappeared. No public statements, no social media presence, no sightings at the restaurants and clubs where she'd once held court. Rumors circulated constantly. She was in a psychiatric facility. She'd fled to Europe. She was hiding in shame at a friend's house. The media treated her as the invisible villain, analyzing her schemes and failures while she remained absent from the conversation. What disturbed me were the comments sections beneath every article about the Ross family saga. People who'd once fawned over Madison, who'd attended her parties and praised her vision, now competed to condemn her most viciously. They called her a fraud, a monster, a sociopath. They analyzed her every past action through the lens of her current disgrace, finding evidence of manipulation in moments that had once seemed charming. The speed with which public opinion had turned was dizzying, and if I was honest with myself, a little frightening. If they could hate her this completely after loving her so thoroughly, what did that say about the reliability of public judgment about anyone? The legal proceedings required me to review years of company records and security footage. Eleanor's team was building cases against Richard Caldwell and documenting every instance of fraud for potential criminal charges. I spent hours watching surveillance footage from Madison's office, tracking her movements and meetings, looking for evidence of Richard's involvement in the financial schemes. That's when I started noticing things I'd missed before. Small details that didn't fit the narrative of Madison as calculating mastermind. In footage from 8 months ago, Madison was on the phone, and when it rang with a call from an unknown number, her entire body went rigid. She answered with visible reluctance, and though I couldn't hear the conversation, I could see her hands begin to shake. In another clip from 6 months back, she sat alone in her office after hours, head in her hands, crying with the kind of desperate, gasping sobs that suggested genuine anguish rather than theatrical tears. The most disturbing footage came from a meeting between Madison and someone the security logs identified as Richard Caldwell. I'd never seen him in person. He'd been remarkably successful at avoiding cameras and staying out of public records. But here he was, tall and commanding, leaning over Madison's desk while she shrank back in her chair. When he reached toward her, she flinched, not dramatically but unmistakably, the body language of someone anticipating pain. I paused the footage and zoomed in on Madison's wrist as she signed documents Richard had placed before her. There were bruises there, dark marks partially hidden by her sleeve. I'd seen those bruises before, and other footage had dismissed them as accidents, as clumsiness. Now in context, they looked like something else entirely. Eleanor came to my office that evening and found me watching the footage on repeat, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I believed I knew about my sister. "What are you looking at?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I turned the monitor toward her and played the clip again. "Tell me what you see." Eleanor watched in silence, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When the footage ended, she sat back and looked at me carefully. "She's terrified of him." "That's what I thought too. But Madison's a performer. She could be faking fear to manipulate him." "No," Eleanor shook her head firmly. "I've watched enough of Madison's performances to know the difference. That flinch when he moves toward her, that's instinctive. You can't fake that kind of fear response. And look at her body language throughout. She's trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. That's not the behavior of someone in control." Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's not the mastermind, Liv. Look at her. Liars don't act like that when they're winning. They act like that when they're trapped." I stared at the frozen image on my screen, Madison's face partially turned away, marked by an expression of fear and exhaustion. For months, I'd thought of her as the architect of my destruction, the calculating villain who'd deliberately ruined my life. But this footage suggested something more complicated. She'd still done terrible things, still hurt me profoundly, still made choices that destroyed lives. But what if those choices had been made under duress? What if she'd been a weapon someone else wielded against me? "If Richard was controlling her," I said slowly, "does that change what she's responsible for? Does being a victim excuse becoming a victimizer?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "But I think we need to find out exactly what his relationship with her was. Because if he manipulated Madison into framing you, he's the real enemy here. And he's still out there, Liv. He lost $50 million and his primary puppet. Men like that don't just disappear, they regroup. As if summoning him through conversation, my computer chimed with a new email notification. "Unknown sender, no subject line at first glance. Then the subject appeared one word at a time as if being typed in real time. "You may have won, but you're not safe. He's still watching." Eleanor and I stared at the screen at those words that felt like a direct threat materialized from our discussion. My hand hovered over the mouse, afraid to open it, afraid not to. "Don't click it," Eleanor said sharply. "Let my security team analyze it first. If this is from Richard, we need to know how he got your private email and what else he might have access to." But we both understood what the message meant. The battle I thought I'd won was just the opening move in a game much larger and more dangerous than I'd realized. Richard Caldwell was still out there. And now, instead of working through Madison, he was coming for me directly. Eleanor's security team spent 3 days analyzing the threatening email, tracing IP addresses and examining metadata. They found nothing conclusive. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks. But the message had accomplished its purpose. It had reminded me that Richard Caldwell was still out there watching, waiting. I increased building security, varied my daily routine, and tried not to let paranoia dictate my life. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to believe maybe the email had been a bluff, a final, desperate attempt at intimidation from a man who'd already lost. Then Madison struck back. The video appeared on a Tuesday morning, uploaded simultaneously to multiple social media platforms by accounts that had been created just hours earlier. My assistant saw it first and came to my office white-faced, holding her phone out like it was contaminated. "Ms. Ross, you need to see this." The video was labeled, "Olivia Ross, the Truth Behind the Revenge," and it showed me speaking my words clear and damning. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to lose everything just like they made me lose everything. Every move was calculated. Every loss they experienced I orchestrated. I watched them beg, and I enjoyed it. The footage appeared to be from various moments' security camera angles, what looked like hidden camera footage from Eleanor's office, clips from my press conference edited and rearranged. My face, my voice, my words all assembled into a confession of vindictive cruelty. I watched it twice, my stomach churning with a toxic mixture of rage and fear. The video was expertly manipulated. Someone with serious technical skills had taken real footage of me and spliced it together with audio clips, deepfake technology, and careful editing to create something that looked and sounded authentic. To anyone who didn't know the truth, it would be completely convincing. The video went viral within hours. By noon, it had been viewed over 2 million times. By evening, major news outlets were covering it, analyzing it, debating its authenticity. Social media exploded with competing hashtags. Had justice for Olivia from people who defended me as a victim fighting back. Had both sides. Wrong from people who condemned both me and Madison as equally manipulative. Ross family crisis from people who just wanted to watch the drama unfold. The damage was immediate and severe. 3 clients called to postpone scheduled meetings. 2 board members requested emergency discussions about my leadership. Business partners who'd praised my turnaround of Ross Holdings suddenly had concerns about my judgment and character. The carefully constructed narrative of wronged daughter seeking justice was crumbling, replaced by a darker story of calculated revenge taken too far. Eleanor called an emergency meeting with her tech team and the head of our legal department. We gathered in the conference room screens displaying the offending video from multiple angles as her specialists analyzed every frame. Its sophisticated deepfake technology combined with selective editing, her lead tech analyst explained, pointing to subtle inconsistencies in the video. "See here, the lighting on her face doesn't match the background. And here the audio has been spliced from at least 4 different sources. Whoever made this had significant resources and technical expertise." "Can we prove it's fake?" I asked. "Absolutely. We can provide forensic analysis showing the manipulation. But the question is whether anyone will care. Deepfake accusations are easy to make and hard to disprove in the court of public opinion." Eleanor's legal counsel leaned forward. "We need to trace the source, find out who created this and who's distributing it." It took Eleanor's team 6 hours to follow the digital trail. The video had been uploaded by newly created accounts, but the money to create and distribute it had moved through a series of transactions that led back to a freelance journalist named Marcus Webb, a man who'd been fired from 3 publications for fabricating sources and who now sold his services to the highest bidder. The payment to Webb had come from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation, and that shell corporation, with enough digging, connected to Richard Caldwell. "Madison's working with him again," Eleanor said, her voice tight with anger. "After everything he did to her after he destroyed her life, she's still taking his money and doing his bidding." I stared at the evidence on the screen, trying to understand what would drive Madison back to Richard. Fear, desperation. Or was she so committed to destroying me that she'd ally with anyone who could help, even the man who'd orchestrated her downfall? "Maybe she doesn't have a choice," I heard myself say. "You saw that security footage. She's terrified of him. What if he's forcing her to do this?" "Then we need to expose him too," Eleanor replied. "A press conference. Full disclosure. We show the forensic evidence proving the video is fake. We present the timeline of Madison's fraud. We reveal Richard's involvement in everything. We destroy this narrative before it destroys you." "That will destroy Madison completely." "She's trying to destroy you, Liv. Again. At some point, you have to stop making excuses for her." Eleanor was right. I knew she was right. But the image of Madison flinching away from Richard kept playing in my mind. Still, I couldn't let this video stand unchallenged. I couldn't let Richard Caldwell rewrite the truth after I'd fought so hard to expose it. "Schedule the press conference," I said. "Tomorrow afternoon. I want every major outlet there. And I want ironclad evidence of every claim we make, the deepfake analysis, the money trail to Richard, all of it." Eleanor nodded, already pulling out her phone to make arrangements. "This is going to be nuclear, Liv. Once we present this evidence, there's no walking it back. Madison will be finished. The public humiliation will be complete." "I know." My voice was steadier than I felt. "But I'm done being the victim of other people's lies." That evening, I stayed late at the office preparing my statement for the press conference. Eleanor's team had compiled hundreds of pages of evidence, forensic analysis of the deepfake video, financial records tracing payments from Richard to Marcus Webb, documentation of Madison's original fraud, proof of every manipulation and lie. It was comprehensive, devastating, undeniable. I stood before the mirror in my office bathroom, practicing my delivery, watching my own face as I spoke the words that would obliterate what remained of my sister's reputation. I looked tired, I realized. Older than my 39 years. The last 6 months had carved lines around my eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. This was what revenge looked like, apparently. Not triumphant, just exhausted. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence is clear, I said to my reflection, testing different inflections. Madison Ross, with the help of Richard Caldwell, created a fabricated video designed to destroy my credibility and distract from her own crimes. The words felt heavy, final. Once I said them publicly, there would be no forgiveness, no possibility of reconciliation, no path back to anything resembling family. Madison would be utterly destroyed, her name synonymous with fraud and deception. She'd never recover from this. Part of me wondered if that's what I really wanted, or if I'd gotten so caught up in the momentum of revenge that I'd forgotten to ask whether complete destruction was actually justice. I looked at my reflection and spoke the words that had been echoing in my mind since that rainy morning outside my parents' house. I kept quiet once. Not again. Tomorrow I would speak. Tomorrow the truth would come out, all of it, without mercy or restraint. Tomorrow, Madison would learn what it felt like to have your life dismantled by someone who knew exactly where to strike. I just hoped I could live with who I'd become when it was over. The press conference room was packed beyond capacity, journalists standing along the walls, cameras creating a forest of lenses and lights. I'd held press conferences before, but this felt different. The energy in the room was electric, with anticipation almost predatory. They knew something significant was coming. They just didn't know how significant. I took the podium with Eleanor standing slightly behind me, a silent show of support and authority. The room fell immediately silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on me, recording devices capturing every micro-expression. I placed my notes on the podium but didn't look at them. I'd practiced this enough to speak from memory, from conviction. Thank you all for coming. I'm here to address the video that's been circulating for the past 24 hours, the one purporting to show me confessing to orchestrating my family's financial collapse out of revenge. I paused, letting the room settle into complete attention. That video is a fabrication, a sophisticated deepfake created by combining manipulated audio with selectively edited footage. I have forensic evidence proving this, which will be distributed to all of you after this conference. Behind me, Eleanor triggered the presentation. The screens flanking the podium displayed a side-by-side comparison, Madison's video on one side, the forensic analysis on the other. The technical expert's report highlighted the inconsistencies in lighting, the audio splicing points, the digital artifacts that proved manipulation. The video was created by Marcus Webb, a freelance journalist with a documented history of fabricating content. Mr. Webb was paid $75,000 for this work. I advanced to the next slide, bank records showing the payment trail. That payment originated from an offshore account controlled by Richard Caldwell, the same man who orchestrated my sister's original fraud scheme 6 months ago. The room erupted with shouted questions. I raised my hand for silence and continued. I also have audio evidence of Madison Ross's direct involvement with Richard Caldwell in the schemes that destroyed my reputation and my family's finances. This recording was obtained legally through security systems in place at her former office. I played the audio. Madison's voice, strained and frightened, saying, "I did everything you asked, Richard. When will this be enough?" Richard's cold response, "When I say it's enough." The quality was clear, the context unmistakable. When it ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Madison Ross, with Richard Caldwell's guidance, framed me for embezzlement using forged documents and fabricated financial records. When that scheme succeeded in destroying my career and reputation, I was forced to rebuild my life from nothing. Now, as I've succeeded in that rebuilding, they've attempted to destroy me again with this manipulated video. I'm here to make sure the truth is finally heard completely and without distortion. I went through it all then, the complete timeline of Madison's fraud, the evidence I'd gathered immediately after being disowned, the strategic decisions I'd made to let my family reveal their true nature rather than simply clearing my name. I held nothing back. Every document was projected on the screens behind me, every piece of evidence laid out with clinical precision. By the time I finished, 45 minutes had passed, and the journalists had filled notebooks with material that would dominate news cycles for weeks. "I'll take 3 questions," I said, breaking my usual policy of taking none. The questions came rapid fire, but I answered each one directly. Yes, I had evidence of my innocence from the beginning. Yes, I chose not to use it immediately because I wanted my family to face the consequences of their choices. No, I didn't orchestrate the $50 million loss that was the result of Madison and Richard's decisions combined with market forces I predicted but didn't cause. I concluded with words I'd rehearsed a dozen times, but that still felt raw and true. Revenge doesn't heal, but it teaches the truth. I didn't do this to hurt my family. I did it to ensure the truth couldn't be buried under more convenient lies. I stepped back from the podium. Thank you. The room exploded with shouted questions, but I walked away through a wall of camera flashes and recorder-thrust hands, Eleanor's security team clearing a path. I'd said everything I came to say. Anything more would just be performance. News coverage of my parents' reaction reached me within the hour. Crews had been staking out their rental house, and cameras captured my mother collapsing on the front steps, sobbing, while my father stood behind her with his face in his hands. They issued a statement through their attorney that evening. A formal public apology admitting they'd been wrong about everything, that I'd been innocent all along, that they'd failed me in every way parents could fail a child. The statement felt hollow, performative years too late. Madison was formally charged that afternoon. Fraud, conspiracy, defamation. Her lawyer tried to arrange a surrender, but Madison didn't show up at the designated time. The district attorney's office issued a warrant. The media coverage was overwhelming, unavoidable. Every channel, Every website, every social media platform dissected the Ross family saga like it was the most compelling drama of the decade. People who'd never heard of us 3 months ago now had strong opinions about who was right, who was wrong, who deserved sympathy. I watched some of the coverage from my apartment that evening, sitting alone in the dark with my phone silenced and my laptop closed. I should have felt triumphant. I'd won. Completely, decisively, publicly. Madison was facing criminal charges. My parents had publicly admitted their failure. My reputation was restored. The truth was finally undeniably known. Instead, I felt nothing. Empty. Hollow. Like I'd spent 6 months climbing a mountain only to discover there was nothing at the summit but wind and cold. Eleanor called around 9. I let it go to voicemail at first, then felt guilty and called back. "You did it," she said, her voice warm with satisfaction. "Everything we planned, it worked perfectly." "Yeah," I managed. "Liv, are you okay?" "I don't know." The honesty surprised me. I thought this would feel different. I thought winning would feel like something. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Winning rarely feels the way we think it will, especially when the victory comes at this cost. You did what you had to do. You exposed the truth. That matters. Does it? I asked. Madison's destroyed. My parents are broken. I got my revenge and I feel like I've lost something I can't even name. You feel like you've lost your innocence, Eleanor said softly. You can't go back to being the person who took the high road, who turned the other cheek. You became someone who fights back, who destroys when necessary. That changes you, but it doesn't make you wrong. We talked for a few more minutes, but I barely remembered the conversation afterward. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, trending across every social media platform, my name on everyone's lips, and felt more alone than I had the day my father threw my suitcase down the steps. I must have fallen asleep eventually because morning light woke me. I was still on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes. My phone was chiming insistently with notifications. I grabbed it, ready to silence whatever news alert or social media mention was demanding my attention. But it wasn't news or social media. It was a text from Eleanor marked urgent, "Call me immediately." I called. She answered on the first ring. "Madison's missing. Her attorney reported it an hour ago. She was supposed to surrender this morning but never showed up. No one's seen her since she left the courthouse yesterday afternoon. Liv, they've issued a missing person alert. This is everywhere." I sat up suddenly, completely awake, my heart hammering. Missing? What do you mean, missing? Gone. Vanished. Her phone is off. Her apartment is empty. It's like she just disappeared. Eleanor paused. The police are treating it as a potential suicide risk. Given her mental state, the charges she was facing, the public humiliation, they're very concerned. I stared at the wall, trying to process this information, trying to understand what it meant. I'd destroyed Madison so thoroughly that she'd simply ceased to exist. And instead of feeling like justice, it felt like I'd just pushed my sister off a cliff and was only now realizing she was actually going to hit the ground. The missing person investigation dominated every news cycle. Police coordinated with the FBI given the possibility Madison had fled across state or international borders. Her apartment had been found empty, personal items gone, no note, no indication of where she'd gone or why. Detectives interviewed everyone who'd had recent contact with her. Her lawyer, former employees, even our parents who had nothing useful to offer. Madison had effectively vanished. The media narrative shifted dramatically. The woman they'd spent weeks condemning as a fraud and manipulator was now a figure of concern, possibly even sympathy. Mental health experts appeared on news programs discussing the psychological impact of public humiliation, the risk factors for suicide in people facing criminal prosecution, and social ostracism. Reporters who'd eagerly documented Madison's downfall now questioned whether the public and media had been too harsh, whether we'd collectively pushed someone already fragile past her breaking point. I refused all interview requests, issued no statements, maintained complete public silence. But privately, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I reviewed footage from Madison's last public appearance the moment outside the courthouse before she disappeared. She'd looked destroyed beyond tears, beyond performance, just utterly hollowed out. Her eyes had been empty in a way that terrified me. I'd wanted her to face consequences, to understand what she'd done, maybe even to find some path to redemption. I hadn't wanted her to simply cease to exist. Eleanor found me watching that footage for the dozenth time 3 days after Madison's disappearance. "You need to stop torturing yourself with this. She looks like she's already dead in this video, like there's nothing left inside her. She did this to herself, Liv. You exposed the truth. What she chose to do with that truth is on her, not you. Is it I pushed her into a corner? I made sure there was no way out, no possibility of redemption. I wanted her destroyed." The words tasted bitter. "I got exactly what I wanted. Why does it feel like I've done something unforgivable?" Eleanor sat down beside me, her expression gentler than usual. "Because you're not a monster despite what you've had to become to survive this. But don't let guilt rewrite history. Madison framed you for crimes you didn't commit. She stood by while your parents threw you out. She tried to destroy you again with that deep-fake video. She made choices. Bad ones. Cruel ones. You didn't make her do any of that." I wanted to believe her. I tried to believe her. But the image of Madison's empty eyes kept haunting me, whispering that maybe I'd become exactly what I'd accused my family of being, someone who destroyed people without mercy. The envelope arrived at my office exactly 1 week after Madison disappeared. No return address postmarked from San Diego, but clearly hand-delivered by someone who'd bypassed our mail system. My assistant brought it to me with a puzzled expression, noting the lack of proper routing. I opened it carefully, half expecting some kind of threat. Inside was a photograph. Madison lying in what looked like a hospital bed, but not any hospital I recognized. The room was dingy walls, stained equipment, old. Madison looked skeletal, her cheekbones sharp against hollow cheeks, her skin waxy and pale. Bruises marked her arms in various stages of healing. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. She looked like she was dying. Beneath the photo, handwritten on lined paper torn from a notebook, "Help me, please. I'm at Clinica Santa Maria, Tijuana. I can't come back. I know you hate me. I deserve your hate. But I'm dying and I need help, and there's no one else. Please." My hands shook, holding the note. I should have called the police immediately, should have forwarded this to the authorities handling her case. Instead, I found myself staring at the photograph, at my sister reduced to this broken, desperate thing, and feeling a complicated tangle of emotions I couldn't name. There was something else in the envelope. A USB drive, unmarked, taped to the bottom of the envelope flap. I pulled it free and plugged it into my computer, not sure what to expect. The file contained security camera footage time-stamped from 8 months ago. A location I didn't recognize, looked like an upscale home office. Madison was there, and so was a man I'd never seen in person, but recognized from Eleanor's research, Richard Caldwell. The footage had no audio, but the body language told the story clearly. Richard standing over Madison while she sat at a desk, paperwork in front of her. She was shaking her head clearly, refusing something. Richard's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, yanking her partially out of the chair. Even without sound, I could see her cry out. He released her and she fell back, clutching her wrist. Then he leaned down close to her face, speaking intently. Madison's expression was pure terror. The next clip showed Richard pushing her against a wall, his hand around her throat. Not strangling, but threatening. Madison's face was a mask of fear. When he released her, she signed the documents immediately, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. The third clip was the worst. Richard holding up his phone, showing Madison something on the screen. Her face went from fear to absolute horror. She was crying, shaking her head frantically. He kept the phone in front of her face, speaking calmly while she disintegrated. Finally, she nodded, defeated, broken. There were 10 more clips, each showing variations of the same dynamic. Threats, physical intimidation, psychological manipulation. Madison trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape, doing terrible things because the alternative was worse. The final clip showed Madison alone after Richard left, curled in a ball on the floor, sobbing with the desperate gasping sounds of someone completely shattered. I sat frozen at my desk watching the footage loop. Madison had done unforgivable things to me. She'd lied, manipulated, destroyed my life. But these videos showed she hadn't been the architect of her own cruelty. She'd been a weapon Richard Caldwell wielded. She was both perpetrator and victim, guilty and trapped, responsible for her choices, but those choices made under duress I couldn't fully comprehend. Eleanor came to my office an hour later and found me still sitting there, the footage playing on repeat. She watched in silence, her expression growing darker with each clip. "Jesus," she whispered when it finished. "How long has he been doing this to her?" "At least 8 months. Maybe longer." I ejected the USB drive and held it carefully. "She's in Mexico, Tijuana, in some clinic that looks like it's barely functioning. She's asking for help." "You can't go to her live. She's wanted by the police. If you help her flee prosecution—" "I'm not helping her flee, I trailed off, not sure what I was doing. "I need to see her. I need to understand what actually happened. Who she actually is beneath all the manipulation and abuse." "She still framed you. Even if Richard forced her, she still made the choice to destroy you." "I know, but maybe that choice was made by someone who saw no other option. Maybe she spent years being controlled by him, shaped by him until she didn't know how to be anything else." I stood up, decision crystallizing. "I have to go. I don't know if I'm going to help her or just say goodbye, but I have to see her." Eleanor studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll arrange a private flight. And security. You're not going down there alone." I booked the flight for the next morning, packed a small bag, and sent Eleanor a text before I could overthink the decision. "I don't know if I'm going to save her or say goodbye, but I have to see her." Her response came quickly. "I know, just be careful. Richard might be watching her, waiting to see who shows up." I didn't care. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do, even if I didn't know why. Madison was my sister. She'd destroyed me, but before that, she'd been the little girl I'd grown up with. And she was dying alone in a Mexican clinic, terrified and broken. Whatever happened next, at least I'd know I tried. Clínica Santa Maria was located in a part of Tijuana that tourists never saw, down streets where the pavement gave way to dirt and the buildings leaned against each other like they were too tired to stand alone. Eleanor's security team had vetted the location before allowing me to enter, checking for threats, for Richard's surveillance, for any indication this was a trap. They found nothing except a failing medical facility treating people who had nowhere else to go. The room was on the second floor at the end of a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and decay. A nurse who spoke limited English pointed me toward the door, took the cash I offered for Madison's overdue bills, and left me standing outside trying to gather courage I wasn't sure I possessed. Madison was awake when I entered, propped against thin pillows, an IV line running into her bruised arm. She looked worse in person than in the photograph, gaunt to the point of skeletal, her skin gray, her eyes sunken deep in their sockets. When she saw me, something flickered in her expression. Not hope, exactly. More like resignation. "You came," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "You asked me to. I didn't think you would. After everything." She closed her eyes briefly. "You win, Liv. You win everything. I have nothing left. No money, no reputation, no family, no future. You destroyed me completely." I pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down, studying her ravaged face. "I didn't come here to gloat." "Then why did you come?" "I don't know." The honesty surprised both of us. "Maybe because despite everything, you're still my sister. Maybe because I watched those videos of what Richard did to you. Maybe because I'm tired of hating you." Madison's eyes filled with tears that spilled over immediately, like she'd been holding them back for months and finally had permission to let go. "He controlled everything. For 2 years. I thought I loved him at first, thought he was helping me become successful. By the time I understood what he really was, it was too late. He had evidence of things I'd done, threats. he'd use against the family, against you. He said if I didn't help him destroy you, he'd destroy all of us. You still made the choice to frame me. I know. I made terrible choices. Unforgivable choices. I'm not asking you to absolve me. She wiped at her face with shaking hands. I just need you to understand I wasn't the mastermind. I was a coward who chose survival over integrity. I chose wrong every single time. I sat with her through the night listening as she talked about Richard's escalating control, the violence, the threats, the way he'd systematically isolated her from everyone who might help. She'd tried to leave him twice, and both times he'd found her hurt. Her reminded her that he owned her now. The deepfake video had been his idea, his revenge against me for exposing their schemes. Madison had protested, and he'd broken her wrist to ensure compliance. As dawn light filtered through the grimy window, Madison's voice grew quieter, more reflective. Do you remember the lake? She asked suddenly. Which lake? Behind the house, 20 years ago. You were home from college for the summer. The memory came rushing back, distant, incomplete, but real. I don't remember much about that day. You went swimming alone. Mom and Dad were at some benefit dinner. I was 12, supposed to be doing homework. I heard you call out, looked out the window, and saw you going under. You'd gotten a cramp or something, couldn't make it back to shore. Madison's eyes were distant, seeing the past. I ran down there, jumped in, pulled you to the beach. You were coughing up water, terrified. I was terrified too. I thought I'd lost you. The memory crystallized more clearly now. The panic, the water filling my lungs, the sensation of hands grabbing me, pulling me toward safety. You saved my life. I did. It was the only time I ever felt like I mattered to you, like I was more than just the screwed-up little sister. Madison's voice broke. When Mom and Dad came home, I told them what happened. I was so proud, thought they'd finally see me as capable, as important. Instead, Dad said we should never mention it again. Said it reflected poorly on you, made you look reckless. Said people didn't need to know the golden child needed saving by the problem child. I felt something crack inside me, an understanding I'd never reached before. They made you forget the one time you were the hero. They made us both forget. You were always stronger, smarter, better at everything. Everyone knew it, including me. That day was the exception, and they erased it. So I spent my whole life trying to prove I mattered some other way. I became what they needed me to be: charming, dependent, constantly requiring rescue. Until I didn't know how to be anything else. Her tears came harder now. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to explain how I became someone capable of hurting you. For the first time, I saw Madison not as the villain of my story, but as another casualty of our parents' toxic favoritism. We'd both been damaged by them, just in different ways. They'd made me feel unloved and pushed me toward independence. They'd made her feel worthless and pushed her toward desperate attempts to earn their approval. Neither of us had escaped unscathed. I took Madison's hand, feeling how frail she'd become, how close to disappearing entirely. You saved my life once, I said quietly. I'm going to try to save yours now. Madison squeezed my hand weakly. I don't know if I can be saved. We'll find out together. I stayed with her through the next day, arranging proper medical care, talking with doctors about treatment options, making plans to move her somewhere safer, somewhere Richard couldn't find her. We talked about difficult things and trivial things about the past and the possibility of a future. For the first time in our adult lives, we talked like sisters rather than rivals. I must have fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, because I woke to morning light and the sound of nurses in the hallway. It took me a moment to register that Madison's bed was empty sheets, pulled back, IV disconnected. On the pillow lay our mother's antique ring, the one Madison had always worn, and a folded piece of paper. The note was in Madison's handwriting, shaky but legible. Thank you for forgiving me before I deserved it. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I loved them even when I hurt them. You saved me in the only way that mattered. You saw me as human again. but I can't face what comes next. I'm too broken. I'm sorry, Liv. For everything. You were always the stronger one. I ran into the hallway calling for nurses for security for anyone who might have seen where she went. But Madison had vanished again this time, leaving nothing behind but a ring and words that felt like goodbye. I reported Madison's disappearance to the Mexican authorities, immediately gave them the clinic's information, described what she'd been wearing the last time I saw her. They took notes with the weary efficiency of people who'd handled too many missing person cases, promised to search, and sent me back to my hotel with little hope in their voices. Eleanor's security team scoured the area, checked hospitals, shelters, anywhere Madison might have gone. They found nothing. 3 days later, the call came. Mexican authorities had found a woman's body on a beach 20 miles from the clinic, apparent drowning. The description matched Madison's approximate age, height, the general physical condition of someone who'd been severely malnourished. DNA confirmation would take weeks, but they wanted me to know because of the missing person report I'd filed. I sat in my hotel room phone, still in my hand, trying to process information that refused to feel real. Madison might be dead. My sister might have walked into the ocean and simply stopped fighting. Or she might have faked her death, found some way to disappear completely and start over somewhere no one would find her. I didn't know which possibility disturbed me more. The flight back to Portland felt endless. I stared out the window at clouds that looked solid enough to walk on and thought about Madison's note, her final words of apology and love. If she was dead, those were the last words she'd ever say to me. If she was alive, they were the goodbye she'd chosen to leave in her place. Eleanor met me at the airport, took one look at my face, and didn't ask questions. She drove me home, made sure I had food I wouldn't eat, and left me alone with instructions to call if I needed anything. I appreciated her understanding that sometimes there are no words adequate to the moment. I owned everything now. The company was mine, stabilized and profitable. The family home was mine, sitting empty while my parents lived in their rental. My reputation was restored, my innocence proven, my victory complete. I had money, power, vindication, everything I'd fought for. And I felt nothing but crushing, suffocating emptiness. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Madison in that clinic bed. Her hollow eyes, her skeletal frame, the desperate gratitude in her voice when I'd said I'd try to save her. I'd been too late. Or maybe I'd been too late from the beginning, starting the moment I'd chosen revenge over mercy. Eleanor tried to help. She came by every few days with food, with company, with gentle attempts at conversation that I couldn't quite engage with. One evening, sitting in my apartment with untouched takeout between us, she said what she'd clearly been thinking for days. "You didn't destroy her, Liv. She destroyed herself. You just stopped saving her." The words were meant to comfort, to absolve me of guilt. Instead, they settled like stones in my chest. I didn't just stop saving her. I actively pushed her toward destruction. I engineered it, documented it, made sure she couldn't escape it. Because she framed you. Because she destroyed your life first. I know. I know all the logical reasons why what I did was justified. But Madison's dead, Eleanor. Or missing, which might be worse. And I can't shake the feeling that I'm responsible. Eleanor stayed quiet for a long moment. You're grieving. That's normal. That's human. But don't let grief make you forget what she did to you, what she chose to do. But that was exactly what I couldn't reconcile. Madison had made terrible choices. But how many of those choices had been truly free? How much had been coercion from Richard? Manipulation from our parents, desperate attempts to survive in situations she didn't know how to escape. 2 weeks after Madison's disappearance, I announced I was stepping back from Ross Holdings, temporarily, citing personal matters that required my attention. The board accepted my decision with concern. Media outlets speculated about my mental health, wondered if the stress of the family drama had finally caught up with me. People who'd praised my strength and resilience now questioned whether I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. I couldn't tell anymore. I spent days in my apartment doing nothing, watching time pass without purpose or direction. The company I'd fought so hard to control felt meaningless. The vindication I'd sought felt hollow. I'd won, but winning had cost me something I couldn't name or recover. I was considering just leaving, selling everything, moving somewhere no one knew my name or my story, starting over with nothing but money and the hope that distance might bring peace when the email arrived. Unknown sender. Subject line: You don't know the real truth about Madison. My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was from some conspiracy theorist or someone trying to exploit the tragedy. But something made me pause, made me click it open. The message contained only one line. She tried to protect you longer than you know. Watch this. Below it, a video file attachment. I should have called Eleanor, should have had her security team check it first. Instead, I downloaded the file and pressed play. The footage was from a security camera in what looked like a luxury penthouse, probably Richard's home. The timestamp showed it was from 3 years ago, long before Madison had framed me, long before any of this nightmare had begun. Madison was there, younger, healthier, but I could see tension in her posture. Richard entered the frame, and Madison stood up immediately, the body language of someone preparing for confrontation. They argued, no audio, but the gestures were clear. Madison shaking her head, backing away. Richard advancing, his expression darkening. Then his hand shot out and grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the wall. My hand went to my mouth, stomach churning. Richard held her there, speaking directly into her face while she clawed at his hand. When he released her, she collapsed to the floor, gasping. He threw papers at her, clearly demanding she sign them. She refused, and he kicked her a vicious strike to her ribs that made her curl into a ball. The video continued for 10 more minutes, Richard systematically beating Madison, threatening her, forcing her to sign documents while she cried and begged. Finally, she signed. He pulled her up by her hair, kissed her forehead almost tenderly, and left her crumpled on the floor. The video ended. I sat frozen, staring at the black screen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. This was 3 years ago, before any of the events that had destroyed my life. Richard Caldwell had been controlling Madison, hurting her, forcing her compliance years before I'd even known he existed. Madison's nightmare hadn't started when she framed me. It had started long before, and I'd never known. I'd seen her as the villain of my story, never understanding she was the victim in someone else's. She'd been trapped, controlled, systematically abused by a man who'd used her as a weapon against me and probably against others before me. I started crying then, harsh sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. I'd spent months orchestrating Madison's destruction, never understanding that she'd already been destroyed years ago. I'd pursued revenge against someone who'd never been free enough to choose differently, and now she was gone, dead, or disappeared, and I would never be able to tell her I understood, that I was sorry, that I forgave her. The email had come from an unknown sender. I had no way to know who'd sent it or why they'd waited until now to reveal this truth. But it didn't matter. The truth was undeniable, documented, devastating. Madison hadn't been my enemy. She'd been Richard Caldwell's victim, just like me. And I'd finished what he started. I called Eleanor immediately, my hands still shaking from watching the video. She arrived within 20 minutes, found me sitting in the dark with my laptop open, the frozen image of Madison on the floor filling the screen. "Someone sent this," I said without preamble. 3 years ago, Richard was already controlling her, already hurting her. Everything she did to me, every choice she made, it wasn't her plan. It was his. Eleanor sat beside me and watched the video in silence, her expression growing darker with each minute. When it ended, she pulled up additional files on her own laptop, documents she'd been compiling for months. "There's more," she said quietly. "I've been tracking Richard's patterns since we started investigating him. This wasn't the beginning." She showed me financial records, police reports from other cities, testimonies from women who'd been involved with him. Madison made a financial mistake 4 years ago, a bad investment that lost her $50,000 of her own money. Richard found out about it, offered to help her recover the loss, then used that help as leverage. He threatened to tell your parents she'd been reckless with money to expose her failures publicly. For someone as desperate for approval as Madison was, that threat was devastating. So he owned her from the start. Essentially, yes. And once he had control, he escalated systematically. Physical abuse, emotional manipulation, financial control, isolation from anyone who might help her. Classic coercive control tactics. Eleanor pulled up more documents. Here's where it gets worse. 2 years ago, Richard specifically told Madison he wanted her to eliminate the family's smartest member. He identified you as the threat Liv. You were the one person in the family who might see through his schemes, who had the financial expertise to recognize what he was doing. So he used Madison as a weapon to remove you. The words hit me like physical blows. Madison hadn't targeted me out of sibling rivalry or malice. She'd been following orders from someone who'd systematically destroyed her ability to resist. She'd chosen what she thought was survival, not knowing that Richard intended to destroy the entire family regardless of her cooperation. "She tried to protect me," I whispered, remembering the Mexico clinic, her confession about trying to leave Richard twice. She knew what he was doing, and she still tried to resist. She did. Not successfully, not enough, but she tried. That's more than most people manage when they're that completely controlled. Eleanor closed her laptop and turned to face me directly. "Liv, I need to tell you something. About why I really helped you." Something in her tone made me look up, seeing her clearly for the first time since she'd arrived. Her expression was complicated guilt determination and something that looked like long-held pain. "You said you were my college roommate, that Madison had hurt you too." "That's all true, but it's not the whole truth." Eleanor took a breath as if preparing for a confession she'd been holding for years. "My real name isn't Eleanor Gray. It's Emma Ross. I'm your cousin." The room seemed to tilt. I stared at her, searching her face for features I should have recognized, family resemblance I'd been too blind to see. "Emma, Uncle Daniel's daughter." "Yes. You were 12 when my father died. I was 8. He'd gone bankrupt, lost everything in bad investments. Your parents, your father, specifically cut ties with us completely. When my father died, I had no other family. Your parents refused to take me in. Your father said I was bad blood, that my father's failures would taint me, that bringing me into the family would reflect poorly on the Ross name." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the old hurt beneath it. "I went into foster care. Changed my name to Eleanor Gray when I turned 18, determined to build something that would prove I was never bad blood at all. I didn't know. I was so young. I don't remember them even discussing it. They didn't discuss it with you because they didn't want you influenced by the idea that family could be disposable. But that's what I was to them. Disposable." Eleanor's eyes met mine. "I built my company, became successful, and waited. I knew that eventually your family's toxic patterns would turn on you too. When it happened, when they threw you away just like they threw me away, I saw my chance. Not just for revenge against them, but to save you from the same isolation I'd experienced." I felt like I was seeing her for the first time, not Eleanor Gray, my savior and ally, but Emma Ross, my cousin, another casualty of my parents' cruelty. "You've been planning this for 15 years. Not planning revenge exactly. Planning to be ready when you needed help. Planning to ensure that when they rejected you, you wouldn't be alone the way I was." She paused. "And yes, I wanted them to face consequences for what they did to both of us. To all of us. All of us." Eleanor pulled up another set of documents, research she'd clearly been compiling for years. "Richard Caldwell isn't just an opportunistic predator. He's been systematically targeting the Ross family for over a decade. My father's bankruptcy, Richard was involved. He was one of the investors who pulled funding at the critical moment, ensuring my father's collapse. Madison's initial financial mistake 4 years ago, Richard orchestrated the bad investment specifically to create leverage over her. He's been circling your family like a shark for years, destroying you piece by piece." "But why What did we do to him? I don't know yet. But I know he has a pattern. 3 other families in the past 15 years, all wealthy, all prominent, all destroyed financially, and then absorbed by Richard's network of shell companies. He doesn't just steal money. He systematically dismantles families, turns them against each other, and watches them self-destruct. Madison was his tool for destroying yours. And now, with you in control of Ross Holdings, he's positioning to take everything that's left. I looked at the evidence spread across our laptops, the documented history of Richard's predation, the pattern of destruction that had consumed my entire family, including members I'd barely known about. Madison was gone. My parents were broken. Emma Eleanor had spent 15 years preparing for a war she knew would eventually come. And Richard Caldwell was still out there waiting to finish what he'd started. He took everything from both of us. I said, my voice harder than it had been in weeks. From Madison, from Uncle Daniel, from our entire family. I looked at Eleanor, at Emma, my cousin, my only true family left. We need to finish this, not for revenge, for justice, for Madison, for everyone he's destroyed. Eleanor nodded slowly, something like relief crossing her face. I was hoping you'd say that, because I've been tracking him for months, and I think I finally know how to take him down, but I can't do it alone. You're not alone. You never were. I reached out and took her hand. We're family. We should have been all along. For the first time since Madison disappeared, I felt something other than grief and guilt. I felt purpose. Richard Caldwell had spent years destroying my family, using us against each other, profiting from our pain. Now it was time to ensure he faced consequences for every life he'd ruined. Not revenge, justice, and maybe finally peace. Eleanor's investigation into Richard Caldwell had been thorough, but now we dug deeper, looking not just at his recent activities, but at his entire history. We hired private investigators, accessed public records going back decades, tracked his movements through property purchases and business registrations. What we found was a carefully constructed life built on a foundation of obsession and revenge. 25 years ago, Richard Caldwell had been a graduate student at Stanford, brilliant but poor, working multiple jobs to afford tuition. That's where he met my mother, Catherine Webb, who was also a student there. According to yearbook photos and social media archaeology, they'd dated for 2 years. Friends from that era remembered them as a serious couple talking about marriage, about building a life together. Then my mother met my father at a charity gala. James Ross. 3rd-generation wealth-established family name, guaranteed social standing. Within 6 months, my mother had broken up with Richard and become engaged to my father. The wedding announcement in the society pages made no mention of any previous relationship. Richard Caldwell had simply been erased from her history as if he'd never mattered. Eleanor found an interview Richard had given to a small business journal 5 years ago buried in the archives. The journalist had asked about his motivation for success. Richard's response was chilling in retrospect. I learned early that in this world, money isn't just power. It's the ability to make people who once dismissed you understand their mistake. I've spent my career ensuring that people who thought they were better than me learn exactly how wrong they were. He's been planning this for 25 years. Eleanor said, her voice tight with controlled anger as we reviewed the timeline. Every business move, every connection he made, every dollar he accumulated, it was all to position himself to destroy your family. Not quickly, slowly, painfully. In a way that would make your mother watch everything she'd chosen over him crumble to dust. Madison wasn't random, he chose her specifically. Exactly. Your mother's beloved younger daughter, the one she'd always protected and favored. Richard seduced her, controlled her, turned her into a weapon against the family. When he used Madison to destroy you, he was really destroying your mother, making her complicit in losing both daughters. The $50 million collapse, your parents' bankruptcy, the public humiliation, all of it was designed to make your mother suffer for choosing your father over him. I thought about my mother, about her confession that she'd known Madison was lying. Her choice to stay silent suddenly made a different kind of sense. She'd already made one catastrophic choice 25 years ago, prioritizing wealth and status over genuine connection. Maybe some part of her recognized the pattern repeating, recognized that her choices had consequences. But by then it was too late to stop the avalanche she'd set in motion decades earlier. We worked 18-hour days building our case, documenting every connection, every scheme, every victim Richard had left in his wake. Eleanor's team was brilliant, tracing financial patterns and shell companies with forensic precision. We were so focused on the investigation that we didn't notice the signs that Richard had become aware of what we were doing until it was almost too late. The threatening messages started subtly anonymous emails warning Eleanor that some investigations are dangerous for those conducting them. Regulatory complaints filed against her company alleging insider trading violations that were complete fabrications but required time and resources to disprove. Eleanor handled each attack methodically, but I could see the stress building and the tension around her eyes, the way her hands clenched when another false accusation appeared. The break-in happened on a Tuesday night. Eleanor had stayed late at her office working on financial projections that would prove Richard's pattern of asset stripping. Her security system triggered at 11:30 p.m. motion detected on the executive floor. Security reached her office within 3 minutes and found a man in dark clothes rifling through Eleanor's desk, a briefcase full of forged documents beside him. Documents that, if successfully planted, would have framed Eleanor for the exact insider trading violations Richard had already accused her of. The intruder was arrested, but he refused to give any information beyond a name that turned out to be fake. His fingerprints weren't in any database. The documents he'd carried were sophisticated forgeries that would have been nearly impossible to disprove if they'd been successfully planted. Whoever had sent him, and we both knew it was Richard, had resources and connections that went beyond simple wealth. "He's not going to stop," Eleanor said the next day, standing in her office where crime scene tape still marked where the intruder had been apprehended. "He knows we're coming for him and he's trying to destroy our credibility before we can expose him. Then we need to move faster. Hit him before he can hit us again." I pulled up the plans we'd been developing, the elaborate trap designed to use Richard's own patterns against him. We can't just report him to authorities and hope the legal system handles it. He's too connected, too careful. We need to expose him publicly, destroy his reputation and his financial network simultaneously, make it impossible for him to manipulate his way out. Eleanor studied the plans, nodding slowly. "It's risky. If we move too soon, if we don't have absolutely everything documented, he'll slip away. But if we wait too long, he might destroy us first. So we don't wait. We move now this week before he can launch another attack." I felt the familiar focus settling over me, the strategic clarity that had gotten me through the worst of the past year. "He's spent 25 years destroying my family. Let's show him what happens when the family finally fights back." We worked through the night, finalizing every detail, confirming every piece of evidence, preparing for a confrontation that would either end Richard Caldwell's reign of terror or destroy whatever remained of the Ross family legacy. By dawn, we had our plan. By noon, we'd set it in motion. I was in my apartment that evening, reviewing the final documents one more time, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message appeared on my screen, and ice flooded through my veins as I read it. "Your sister told me to finish what she started. Did you really think she was the only one I owned?" I stared at those words, my mind racing through implications. Madison had told him to finish what she started, meaning she'd been in contact with Richard recently, maybe even after Mexico. Or was this another manipulation, Richard trying to make me believe Madison was still alive and still working with him? And the second sentence, "Did you really think she was the only one I owned?" suggested Richard had control over someone else in my circle. But who I forwarded the message to Eleanor immediately, my hands shaking as I typed, "He's making his move. We need to be ready." Her response came within seconds. "On my way to you now. Don't go anywhere alone." I sat in my apartment waiting for Eleanor, staring at that message, trying to decode its meaning, trying to prepare for whatever Richard Caldwell was planning. He'd spent 25 years orchestrating my family's destruction, Now, in what felt like the final act of his revenge, he was coming for me directly. The only question was whether I'd be ready when he arrived. Eleanor arrived at my apartment within 20 minutes, her security team sweeping the building before allowing her upstairs. We sat together reviewing Richard's threatening message, trying to determine if it was a bluff or a genuine warning of immediate danger. But we both knew the time for caution had passed. Richard was making his move, which meant we needed to make ours immediately. We didn't confront Richard directly. That had never been the plan. Instead, we contacted the people we'd been cultivating relationships with for months. An SEC investigator who specialized in complex financial fraud, an FBI agent in the Financial Crimes Unit who'd seen too many families destroyed by predators like Richard. Eleanor and I had learned from our mistakes with Madison. This time, we weren't orchestrating revenge. We were simply ensuring the proper authorities had every piece of evidence they needed to do their jobs. The package we delivered to the SEC was comprehensive and devastating. Richard's emails proving he'd orchestrated Madison's fraud, complete with timestamps and metadata. Money laundering trails showing funds moving through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, Dubai, and Switzerland. Bank records documenting payments to Marcus Webb for the deepfake video. Most importantly, we had Madison's testimony recorded in that Mexican clinic before she disappeared, notarized by a local official Eleanor had located and paid to witness Madison's statement. In the recording, Madison's voice was weak but clear as she detailed Richard's years of control, the physical abuse, the threats against her family, the specific instructions he'd given her to frame me. She named dates, locations, amounts. She provided details only someone with direct knowledge could know. It was her final act of defiance recorded when she knew she might not survive to testify in person. We leaked the story simultaneously to 3 major financial journalists, each of whom had been investigating Richard independently after our anonymous tips over the past months. The coordination was precise. All 3 outlets published within an hour of each other, creating an avalanche of coverage that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. Richard's empire didn't just crack. It shattered completely within 72 hours. The SEC froze his assets pending investigation, locking down bank accounts and investment portfolios worth over $200 million. His wealthy clients, many of whom had tolerated ethical ambiguity in pursuit of returns, abandoned him immediately when criminal charges became likely. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone facing federal prosecution for fraud and money laundering. The media exposés were relentless. Journalists uncovered Richard's pattern of targeting families, found other victims willing to speak now that someone had finally stood up to him. Former business associates, sensing which way the wind was blowing, rushed to provide testimony in exchange for immunity or reduced charges. Each new revelation made Richard more toxic, more isolated, more finished. On the 3rd day, my phone rang from a Miami number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Richard's voice came through the line, calm and controlled, despite the destruction raining down around him. "Olivia Ross, I should have known you'd be the one to finally stop me." "You should have left my family alone." "Your family?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "Your family destroyed themselves. I just provided the catalyst. Your mother chose money over love. Your father chose pride over truth. Your parents chose Madison over you. I didn't make them do any of that. I just exposed what they already were. You manipulated Madison. You abused her. You used her as a weapon. Madison made choices. She could have said no, could have gone to the police, could have protected you instead of sacrificing you to save herself. Everyone makes choices, Olivia. I just created circumstances where their true natures were revealed." I felt cold rage settling in my chest. "You destroyed families for sport. You spent 25 years planning revenge against my mother for a college breakup. You're not some philosophical teacher revealing truth. You're a predator who enjoys causing pain." "Perhaps, but Madison warned me about you. Did you know that? In one of our last conversations, she said you were the dangerous one. She said you'd destroy me without lifting a finger, that you'd let me destroy myself while you documented every moment. She was right. You're far more ruthless than I gave you credit for." She was right, I said, my voice steady and cold. You destroyed families for entertainment. I just let the truth destroy you. There's a difference. Silence on the line for a moment. Then Richard spoke again, and for the first time I heard something other than control in his voice. Resignation, maybe, or the exhaustion of someone who'd finally run out of road. "I suppose there is. Well played, Olivia Ross. Well played." The line went dead. 3 hours later, FBI agents arrested Richard Caldwell at his Miami penthouse on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. News helicopters captured footage of him being led out in handcuffs, his expression blank, his carefully constructed empire reduced to rubble around him. I watched the coverage from Eleanor's office, both of us silent as cameras documented Richard's perp walk. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, no longer the powerful predator who'd orchestrated so much destruction. Just a man in handcuffs facing consequences he'd spent decades believing he was too clever to face. As FBI agents guided him toward an unmarked car, Richard suddenly stopped and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. He said something to the agents who examined it briefly before one of them took it. The news cameras couldn't capture what was written on the envelope, but Eleanor's contacts in the FBI called within the hour. "There's an envelope Richard Caldwell insisted was for you," the agent said. "It's marked, 'Her final gift,' and he claims it's from Madison Ross. We'll need to examine it as potential evidence, but assuming it's cleared, you can collect it from our office tomorrow." I spent that night unable to sleep, wondering what Madison could have left me, what her final gift might be. Eleanor offered to come with me to the FBI office the next morning, but I asked to go alone. Whatever Madison had left felt like something meant only for me. The FBI agent handed me the envelope in a sterile interview room. Madison's handwriting unmistakable on the front, "For Liv, the truth you need." Inside was a handwritten letter. Madison's familiar script covering 3 pages and a USB drive labeled in the same hand, everything he did, evidence I collected knowing I might not survive. I read the letter with tears streaming down my face. Madison's final words to me explaining everything she'd tried to do, everything she'd failed to do, and everything she'd hoped I would do with the evidence she'd gathered. The USB drive contained years of documentation. Richard's crimes, his victims, his patterns, proof of everything he'd done, not just to our family, but to the 3 families before us. Madison had been collecting evidence against Richard for over a year, knowing she might not survive to present it herself, but determined to ensure he faced consequences even if she didn't live to see it. Her final gift wasn't just evidence. It was justice delivered from beyond whatever had happened to her in Mexico, ensuring that even in death or disappearance, she'd helped stop the man who'd destroyed so many lives. Madison's letter was dated 2 weeks before she disappeared from the Mexican clinic, written in the careful handwriting of someone who knew these might be her last words. She began by acknowledging everything she'd done to me, every lie and betrayal, with a clarity that suggested she'd finally stopped making excuses for herself. Then she explained what I hadn't known, that 6 months before framing me, she'd realized Richard was using her to destroy our family, not save it. She'd tried to leave him and he'd hospitalized her. She'd tried to warn our parents indirectly, and he'd threatened to kill them. Trapped between impossible choices, she'd chosen what seemed like the path that would hurt the fewest people, never understanding that Richard's endgame was total destruction regardless of her cooperation. "I couldn't escape him while I was alive," she wrote in the letter's final paragraph. "But I could document everything, gather evidence that would survive me, ensure he'd face justice, even if I didn't live to see it. I destroyed you, Liv, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me at least destroy him. Let this be the one thing I did right. I love you. I always loved you, even when I hurt you. Especially then. Forgive me if you can." I sat in that FBI interview room reading her words over and over, tears streaming down my face, until I could barely see the page. Madison had spent her final months as a spy in her own hell, documenting her abuser's crimes, knowing it might get her killed but doing it anyway because it was the only form of resistance she had left. The USB drive confirmed everything and more. Videos of Richard explicitly describing how he'd orchestrated the fraud against our family, bragging about his manipulation of Madison, explaining his 25-year plan to destroy my mother's life piece by piece. Financial records proving he'd done this to 4 other families over the past 15 years, systematically targeting wealthy families with vulnerable members, using those members as weapons of internal destruction. Most shocking were recorded phone calls connecting Richard to organized crime figures in Miami and overseas money laundering operations that went far beyond anything we'd suspected. Eleanor's FBI contact called me 2 days after reviewing the evidence. "This doesn't just convict Richard Caldwell," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This reopens 4 cold cases, provides justice for victims who thought they'd never get it, and triggers an international investigation into criminal networks we've been trying to penetrate for years. Your sister gave us a roadmap to dismantling a significant organized crime operation. She saved lives, Ms. Ross. However she died a hero." DNA confirmation came 3 weeks later. The body found on that Mexican beach was Madison Ross. She'd walked into the ocean and drowned, whether by choice or accident, the authorities couldn't determine. I flew her remains back to Oregon, arranged for a small private burial, and stood alone at the graveside on a cold morning in November. My parents had asked to attend. I'd said no. This moment was mine and Madison's sister's, finally, without the toxic presence of people who'd failed us both. Eleanor offered to come, but I needed this solitude, this private reckoning with grief and forgiveness, and the complicated mess of loving someone who'd hurt me so profoundly. I'd brought the letter with me, sealed in a waterproof box, along with a note I'd written the night before. My note was shorter than hers, just a few lines, but they were the truest words I'd written in months. "You saved my life twice. Once when we were young and you pulled me from the lake. Once when you died and gave me the evidence to stop the man who destroyed us both. I forgive you, Maddie. I wish I'd understood sooner. I wish I'd saved you when it mattered. Forgive me if you can." I placed the box in the ground beside the simple casket, covered it with earth, and stood there as the sun broke through clouds and warmed my face. Madison was home. Not the person our parents had wanted her to be, not the villain I'd believed she was, but the complicated, damaged, ultimately brave woman she'd actually been. "You did one thing right, Maddie," I whispered to the earth. "You did one thing right." And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all any of us could hope for, to do one thing right in the end, to leave the world slightly better than we found it, to turn our worst moments into a gift for someone else. Madison had done that. Despite everything in her final act, she'd chosen justice over survival, truth over escape, love over fear. I stayed at the grave until the sun began to set, talking to my sister the way I wished I'd talked to her when she was alive, honestly, without judgment, with the understanding that we'd both been casualties of the same war, just wounded in different ways. When I finally left, I felt lighter than I had in months, as if burying Madison had also buried some of the rage and guilt I'd been carrying. She was gone. But her final gift had ensured that Richard Caldwell would spend the rest of his life in prison, that other families would find justice, that her death meant something beyond tragedy. And somehow that mattered more than all the revenge I'd pursued, all the victories I'd claimed. Madison had taught me that in the end, redemption isn't about erasing your mistakes. It's about what you do with the time you have left. The family home had sat empty for months, a monument to everything that had been lost. I'd owned it legally since my parents signed away their rights, but I hadn't been able to bring myself to enter it until the week after Madison's burial. Walking through rooms I'd grown up in felt like touring a museum of my own childhood, everything familiar but somehow distant, belonging to a version of myself that no longer existed. The back garden had been Madison's favorite place when we were young. She'd spent hours there reading under the oak tree, picking flowers, pretending the small shed was her private castle. I hired landscapers to restore it, clearing away the overgrowth and neglect, preparing the soil for something new. In the center where Madison and I had played as children, I planted a young apple tree, its roots nestled in earth mixed with Madison's ashes. The stone marker I commissioned was simple, just a flat granite piece set into the ground, Madison Ross. She lied she fell, but in the end, she loved. It wasn't absolution or excuse. It was acknowledgement that my sister had been more than her worst moments. That people contain multitudes, that love and harm can coexist in the same heart. I told my parents about the memorial service, but made it clear I wanted it small and private. When they arrived, they looked diminished, older than their years moving through the garden, with the careful steps of people no longer certain of their welcome anywhere. My father's hands shook as he stood before the apple tree. My mother wept quietly, her shoulders hunched with grief that went beyond Madison's death to encompass everything they'd lost through their own choices. After a long silence, my father spoke, his voice breaking on nearly every word. "We failed both of you in different ways. We suffocated Madison with expectations she couldn't meet and pushed you away because you didn't need us the way she did. We mistook strength for not needing love and weakness for deserving all of it. We were wrong about everything that mattered." My mother added through her tears, "We don't deserve your forgiveness. We know that. But we need you to know we're sorry. For all of it. For every moment we made you feel less than precious." I stood between them and the tree, these people who'd given me life, but never quite figured out how to give me love, and felt the weight of anger I'd been carrying start to shift. Yes, you failed us both. And I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive that. The wounds you created shaped who we became, and Madison didn't survive hers. I paused, looking at the small tree that held my sister's remains. But I'm done carrying the anger. It's not helping me heal. It's not bringing Madison back. It's just keeping me tied to the past, and I need to be able to move forward. "What does that mean?" my father asked quietly. "It means I can't bring back what's lost, but I can stop the hate from growing. You'll always be my parents. I'll make sure you're taken care of. But we're not going to pretend we're a close, loving family. We're just going to be people who share history and are trying not to hurt each other anymore." They nodded, accepting limitations they had no power to contest. We stood together for a few more minutes, then they left quietly, understanding this was all I could offer, and maybe more than they deserved. Eleanor found me an hour later, sitting with my back against the young apple tree, watching clouds move across the sky. She settled beside me without speaking, both of us comfortable with silence. "So what now, Liv?" she finally asked. "You've destroyed your enemies, saved yourself, uncovered the truth, gotten justice for Madison. What does Olivia Ross do next?" I considered the question, realizing I genuinely didn't know. For so long, my life had been defined by responding to betrayal, responding to loss, responding to threat. Now, with Richard in prison and Madison at rest, and my parents accepting their reduced role in my life, I had space to simply be rather than react. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I finally get to decide for myself. Not because of what my family expects or what society demands or what revenge requires. Just what I actually want. That feels like freedom, even if it's terrifying." Eleanor smiled, the expression of someone who understood exactly what I meant. Freedom usually is. We sat together in the garden, my cousin and I, the last functional remnants of the Ross family, until the sun began to set and painted everything in shades of amber and gold. As we stood to leave, my phone rang. A lawyer's number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Ross, this is David Chen from Whitmore and Associates. I'm handling your father's estate planning documents. We found a sealed envelope he left with instructions to deliver it to you only after Madison's funeral. Given the circumstances, we thought you should know it exists. When would be convenient for you to collect it?" I looked at Eleanor, at the tree holding Madison's ashes, at the garden we'd just consecrated to memory and healing. Another secret, another revelation, another piece of the past demanding attention. "Tomorrow," I said. "I'll come by tomorrow." Because whatever my father had left me, whatever final words or confessions he'd prepared, they could wait one more day. Today belonged to peace, however fragile and new. Tomorrow would be soon enough to discover what other truths the Ross family had been hiding. The envelope my father had left was thick, sealed with wax in an old-fashioned way that suggested formality and finality. The lawyer handed it to me in his office the next morning, explaining that my father had deposited it with their firm 13 months earlier, shortly after a health scare that had put him in the hospital overnight. The instructions had been specific, delivered to Olivia only after Madison's funeral, not before, regardless of circumstances. I waited until I was alone in my apartment to open it. Inside was a letter in my father's careful handwriting dated from a time when the family was still intact, before Madison's schemes had detonated everything. He began with an admission that took my breath away. "I've always known you were the stronger daughter, the more capable one, the one who would succeed regardless of what life threw at you. That's precisely why I failed you." He explained that after his heart attack facing his own mortality, he'd been forced to reckon with his choices as a parent. He'd seen Madison's fragility from early childhood, her desperate need for validation, her inability to cope with failure or rejection. He'd convinced himself that Olivia could handle being overlooked because she was resilient while Madison would shatter without constant support and protection. "I sacrificed you because I believed you'd survive anything," he wrote. "I gave Madison everything because I feared she'd survive nothing. I was wrong to make that choice. But I was too weak to protect both of you, so I protected the one I thought needed it most." The letter included a copy of a will he'd written that same day, leaving 50% of the family's remaining assets to me in recognition of years of neglect and unfair treatment. My mother had received a copy, he noted, and had hidden it, rather than honoring his wishes, choosing once again to protect Madison over doing what was right. I read the letter 3 times, searching for the anger or vindication I expected to feel. Instead, I just felt sad. My father hadn't been malicious or deliberately cruel. He'd been weak and misguided, making catastrophic parenting decisions based on fear rather than wisdom. He'd loved both his daughters and failed both of us in different ways. Understanding his reasoning didn't erase the pain his choices had caused, but it provided context that made forgiveness feel possible eventually when the wounds were less raw. The letter sparked something in me, a realization that Madison's final gift of evidence shouldn't be the end of her story, but the beginning of something larger. Within 3 months, I'd established the Madison Ross Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women escape situations of financial abuse and coercive control. I funded it with money from Ross Holdings, structured it with Eleanor's help, and built it around the hard lessons Madison and I had both learned about how power and money could be weaponized within families and relationships. The media coverage of the foundation's launch was extensive. Journalists who'd covered the Ross family scandal now framed it as a story of transformation and healing. They called me the woman who rose twice, once from false accusations that destroyed my career, and once from the emptiness of revenge that could have destroyed my soul. I began speaking publicly about what had happened, but I was careful never to frame it as a revenge success story or a tale of triumphant justice. Instead, I talked about family dysfunction, about the cost of favoritism, about how easily people can be manipulated when they're desperate and afraid. I talked about believing accusers while still seeking truth, about the complexity of situations where someone can be both perpetrator and victim. The message resonated. Within 6 months, the foundation had helped dozens of women, and I was receiving hundreds of letters from people who saw themselves in Madison's story or mine. For the first time in my life, I was building something based on healing rather than reaction. Not responding to betrayal or fighting against injustice, but proactively creating something that might prevent others from experiencing what my family had endured. It felt like purpose beyond survival, meaning beyond vindication. The foundation's first major fundraising event was held at a hotel in downtown Portland, attended by donors and advocates and survivors of financial abuse. I gave a speech about Madison, about her final act of courage, about how even people who make terrible choices can find redemption in their last moments. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of people who'd come to support this mission, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. After the event, while greeting attendees, a young woman approached me with a letter in her trembling hands. She looked to be in her early 20s with dark hair and eyes that reminded me unsettlingly of Madison's. She handed me the letter without speaking, then disappeared into the crowd before I could ask her name. I opened it later that evening alone in my office. The handwriting was young, careful, the words chosen with obvious deliberation. My name is Lily. I'm Madison Ross's daughter, given up for adoption when she was 17. I just learned about everything that happened. About her, about you, about all of it. I don't know if you'll want to meet me. I don't know if I have any right to reach out. But I'm trying to understand who my birth mother was, and you're the only person left who really knew her. Can we talk? I stared at those words, my hands shaking, my mind reeling with implications I hadn't begun to process. Madison had a daughter. I had a niece, and she'd just stepped into my life asking for the one thing I was finally learning how to give: understanding, connection, and the truth about where she came from. I met Lily 3 days later at a quiet cafe, neutral territory, where we could talk without the weight of offices or family homes pressing down on us. She arrived exactly on time, carrying a folder that I recognized immediately as adoption paperwork and DNA test results. She was 15, almost 16, with Madison's dark hair and delicate features. But something in her eyes that was entirely her own, a guardedness that came from growing up knowing you'd been given away, a careful self-protection I recognized from my own childhood. She slid the documents across the table without preamble. I did a DNA test through one of those ancestry websites. It matched me to Madison Ross. My adoptive parents always told me my birth mother was young, that she wasn't ready to be a parent. They're good people. They love me. But I needed to know where I came from. She paused, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. Can you tell me who my mother really was? I could have given her easy answers, sanitized versions that protected her from difficult truths. Instead, I chose honesty, because that's what I wished someone had given me. Over the next 2 hours, I told her everything. Madison's charm and creativity, her desperate need for approval, the way our parents' favoritism had shaped her into someone who couldn't believe she had value without external validation. I told her about Richard's abuse, about the years Madison spent trapped in circumstances she couldn't escape. I told her about the fraud and the lies, not to vilify Madison, but to help Lily understand that her mother had been complex, flawed, and ultimately human. She made terrible choices, I said as afternoon light slanted through the cafe windows. She hurt people, including me. But she was also trapped in ways she didn't know how to escape. And in the end, she tried to make it right. She gathered evidence that put a dangerous man in prison and helped other victims. She died trying to be better than her circumstances allowed her to be. Lily absorbed this in silence, tears tracking down her face. Do you think she ever thought about me, about the baby she gave up? I think she thought about you every day. I think giving you up was probably the hardest thing she ever did, and maybe the most selfless. She was 17, alone, trapped in a family that wouldn't have supported her. She gave you a chance at a better life than she could provide. We met regularly after that, building a relationship slowly and carefully. Lily was whip-smart, interested in psychology and sociology, fascinated by the dynamics that had destroyed her birth family. She asked questions I didn't always know how to answer, pushed me to examine my own choices and motivations. After 6 months of conversations and consultations with lawyers and therapists, I asked if she'd consider letting me adopt her. Her adoptive parents had passed away in a car accident when she was 13, and she'd been living with an aunt who loved her but was overwhelmed by single parenthood. I don't know if I'll be a good parent, I told her honestly. I never learned from good examples, but I promise I'll see you, really see you, as you are, not as who I need you to be. You won't have to perform or prove your worth. You'll just be Lily, and that will be enough. She said yes. The legal process took months, but by the time Lily turned 16, the adoption was final. She moved into my house, claimed the guest room as her own, and began the process of becoming part of my life in a way that felt both terrifying and healing. I taught her things I wished someone had taught me: financial literacy, how to recognize manipulative behavior, how to build self-worth that didn't depend on others' approval. We talked about Madison often keeping her memory alive, not as a saint or a villain, but as a complicated woman who'd done both good and terrible things. On Lily's 16th birthday, I took her to the garden where the apple tree grew Madison's final resting place. We sat together under its branches, still young but growing stronger each season. "Your mother made mistakes, so you wouldn't have to," I told her. "Learn from her pain. Don't repeat it. But don't let her story define yours either. You get to be your own person." Lily was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What do you want my life to be about?" I turned the question back to her. "What do you want your life to be about?" She thought carefully before answering, her face serious and open in a way that reminded me of Madison before the world had taught her to hide. Not revenge, not proving anything, just real. I want to be real. To help people maybe the way the foundation helps people. But mostly just to be honest and connected and not performing all the time. I felt tears prick my eyes and smiled through them. "Then you're already wiser than I was at your age. Than I was even a year ago." We sat together under the apple tree as the sun set. My niece and adopted daughter, the next generation of the Ross family, learning to be something our family had never managed to be, before genuine, connected, and free from the cycles of favoritism and rejection that had destroyed so many lives before hers. Madison had given me many things intentionally and unintentionally, but Lily was perhaps her greatest gift, a second chance to raise a young woman with love and truth, to break the patterns that had broken us, to prove that family could be chosen and remade and healed. 10 years pass differently than you expect. What feels monumental in the moment becomes just another chapter in a longer story, and perspectives shift in ways you can't anticipate when you're living through trauma. The documentary filmmaker who contacted me was making a series about families torn apart by betrayal and how people rebuild afterward. I agreed to participate, not because I wanted to relive the past, but because I thought maybe my story could help someone else understand that surviving isn't the same as healing and that both are necessary. I sat for the interview in my office at the foundation, now 49 years old, with silver streaking through my blonde hair, wearing reading glasses I'd recently needed, and carrying a calm I'd fought hard to earn. The filmmaker asked me to describe what happened a decade ago, and I found myself telling the story as if it had happened to someone else, with compassion for all the players, including the younger version of myself who'd thought revenge would fix what was broken. "They threw me out like a thief," I said, looking directly into the camera. "But I walked away as a survivor, and eventually as someone who learned that winning isn't the same as healing. I won everything. I got revenge, vindication, control, wealth. But none of that made me whole. That came later through harder work." The documentary showed what had become of everyone. Eleanor still sometimes slipped and called her that. Instead of Emma had transformed her investment firm into a major force in ethical investing, using her platform to advocate for transparency and accountability in financial systems. My parents lived in the family home I owned, our relationship cordial but forever marked by distance some wounds create. We spoke occasionally, saw each other on holidays, maintained the basic structures of family without pretending we were close. Richard Caldwell was serving a 30-year sentence in federal prison, and I never thought about him anymore. The Madison Ross Foundation had helped over 300 women escape situations of financial abuse and coercive control, and it remained the work I was most proud of. And Lily, brilliant, compassionate Lily, was finishing her psychology degree, planning to specialize in helping trauma survivors, carrying forward Madison's unintended legacy of turning pain into purpose. When the interviewer asked if I regretted my revenge, I took my time answering, wanting to be truthful rather than performative. I don't regret seeking truth and justice. I regret that I thought destroying Madison would heal me. It didn't. She was already destroyed by forces I didn't understand. What actually healed me was helping others, raising Lily, learning to live without anger consuming me. Revenge gave me power. Forgiveness gave me peace. They're not the same thing, and one matters so much more than the other. The final scene of the documentary was filmed in the garden on a golden autumn afternoon. The apple tree had grown tall and strong over the decade, its branches heavy with fruit. Lily stood beside me, 26 now, and so beautiful it sometimes took my breath away. Not just physically, though she had Madison's looks, without the desperation that had marked my sister's beauty, but beautiful in her confidence and kindness, and the genuine way she moved through the world. I placed my hand on the tree's trunk, feeling the rough bark under my palm, and spoke words I knew the camera wouldn't catch but that I needed to say anyway. "You saved me once when we were kids, Maddie. I wish I could have saved you too. But maybe I can save what you left behind. Maybe that's enough." I reached up and picked an apple, handed it to Lily. She smiled at me with so much love and trust that I felt my throat tighten with gratitude for second chances, for the possibility of breaking cycles, for discovering that family could be chosen and healed and remade into something better than what you'd inherited. We walked toward the house together as the sun painted everything in shades of amber and gold, and my voiceover closed the documentary with the truth I'd learned through years of hard work and harder choices. Forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me, the woman they couldn't break. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. I know it wasn't an easy story to hear. It certainly wasn't an easy story to live. But I wanted to share it because I believe there's something in it that matters beyond just my family's tragedy. It's about what happens when we choose revenge over healing, when we let anger drive our decisions, and ultimately, when we find our way back to peace. The question I get asked most often, whether in interviews or at foundation events, is whether I would do it all again knowing what I know now. The honest answer is, I don't know. I can't separate who I am today from the path I took to get here. The revenge I pursued gave me power and vindication, but it also cost me years of peace and nearly cost me my humanity. If I'd chosen forgiveness earlier, would Madison still be alive? Would our family have found a different kind of healing? I'll never know, and I've had to learn to live with that uncertainty. What I do know is, this revenge is seductive. When you've been wronged, when people you love have betrayed you, the desire to make them suffer the way they made you suffer feels like justice. It feels righteous. But revenge is also empty. It gives you a moment of satisfaction and then leaves you alone with the wreckage you've created, wondering if winning was worth what you lost along the way. Real healing doesn't come from destroying the people who hurt you. It comes from choosing to stop letting that hurt define you. I'm sharing this story not to glorify what I did, but to be honest about its cost. Yes, I exposed the truth. Yes, I brought criminals to justice. Yes, I rebuilt my life and created something meaningful from the ashes. But I also lost my sister, damaged my relationship with my parents beyond full repair, and spent years consumed by anger that nearly destroyed me from the inside out. If my story can help even one person choose a different path, choose healing over revenge, choose truth without destruction, choose justice that doesn't require becoming as ruthless as your enemies, then maybe everything I went through will have served a purpose beyond my own survival. The Madison Ross Foundation continues to grow, helping women every day who find themselves trapped the way my sister was trapped. Lily is thriving, building a life defined by purpose and authenticity rather than performance and fear. Eleanor and I remain close, two cousins who found each other in the wreckage and rebuilt something stronger than what we'd lost. And I've learned to live with the complicated truth that you can love people who hurt you, grieve for people who betrayed you, and forgive without forgetting. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced family betrayal, or wondered about the cost of revenge, or if you simply found yourself invested in what happened to all of us, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been wronged by someone you loved? How did you choose to respond? Do you think revenge can ever truly bring peace, or is forgiveness the only path to real healing? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your perspectives help me continue to understand my own journey. And if you found value in hearing this story told honestly without sugarcoating the difficult parts, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like mine out there, Stories of people who survived betrayal, who rebuilt their lives, who learned hard lessons about justice and mercy and what it means to truly heal. By subscribing, you'll be part of a community that believes in truth-telling and learning from each other's mistakes, and in finding paths forward even when the past has left us broken. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding that real life is messy and complicated and doesn't always have the neat endings we see in movies. And thank you for being part of a conversation about what it means to survive, to heal, and ultimately to forgive, not for the people who hurt us, but for ourselves.